Ben clasped his head as his harried sister and wife fretted over what was to become of him. He was more consumed by the fear of what would happen if his wife found out the whole truth. She knew that he had seen a crime committed by a ruthless criminal cartel. The true story of how he got there, however, was closely guarded. He could not bring himself to admit the truth that he was escorting a young woman to her apartment when the incident occurred. Everyone had seemed to believe his story that he was just scouting for a new business opportunity in the area. It was something he often did at night after work in order to deflect any unwanted conclusions by his wife about where he was spending most nights before he returned home. The killing he had witnessed weighed on him immediately. The reality got even worse when his mistress Dusher was killed by the same outfit that they had unwittingly observed. It was at that moment that he concluded that he could no longer deny that the criminals knew that their crime had not gone unnoticed. With the realization that the killers were likely closing in on him, Ben went to the police. He told them everything he saw, but he hid the true reason why he was in the area. The police took his statement and brought it to the prosecutor's office. The statement and his positive identification of the perpetrators helped to secure a string of federal indictments. Ben's nervousness about being discovered by the killers had left him unable to sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time for more than a month. He was at wit's end before the assistant prosecutor mistakenly disclosed his identity in open court. Now, his wife was trying to push him out of the area entirely. He was being told to give up his luxurious life to go into hiding in the witness protection program. That was not something that was even remotely acceptable in his mind. Ben, going into hiding is the safest. His wife began to insist. We can't walk away from my company. There's too many people depending on us, Ben retorted, cutting her off. Ben, it's too dangerous, his wife insisted. What am I going to do? I can't leave everyone high and dry. Oh, Ben and Drew are gone. Hey, we all need new jobs. Your sister can handle. It's not a one-man job, Ben retorted. I guess we could make arrangements, Natalie interjected. What kind of arrangement? Ben demanded to know, with his wife equally as interested. Well, maybe Ben could still come to work. How are we going to do that? Drew asked while she threw her arms up to her sides, curious if Natalie was withholding the answer to all of their concerns. What if we disguised Ben? That's not going to work. Ben answered his sister in a dismissive tone before she cut him off. Natalie was peeved by his tone, but she continued, I mean a real disguise. A 24-hour disguise. Are you talking about surgery? Ben asked, feeling alarmed by the prospect. No, nothing permanent. I'm not doing surgery, Ben responded with a stern look. I just said that it wouldn't involve surgery, Natalie replied, getting short with her brother for not listening to her again. How would it work? Drew inquired. We need you to become someone that they wouldn't look twice at, Natalie answered as she looked at Drew's husband. If they see a guy with a fake nose. No. We'd have to go much deeper than that. How much deeper? You couldn't look anything like yourself. We can't just change your face. We need to disguise your height, your weight, your build. We need to throw them off the trail entirely. What are you saying? Are you looking to put me in a fat suit, because I can always see Eddie Murphy through? No. Then, what are you getting at? Ben demanded to know. Ben, do you know what Serena does? No, Ben answered, having never felt the need to inquire about what his sister's friend from college did for a living. Well, she runs a place that can help you. What does she do? She does makeovers. Ben gave his sister a confused look. Drew leaned back on her heels as she tried to process the implications of what Natalie was saying. Ben shook his head as he began to inquire, exactly, how would a makeover? Male to female makeovers, Natalie specified before her brother could complete his inquiry. Ben stared at his sister in silence with his mouth agape. His mind was swimming while he wondered if his little sister had lost her grip on reality. You think anyone would believe that I'm... You have to see her work, Natalie countered before she brought up the website on her phone. Ben shook his head at his sister and brushed aside her hand when she tried to show him the photographs. Natalie looked at Drew and said, "Drew, please talk some sense into him." Drew shook her head while she responded, "I don't think." "Just look at the pictures," Natalie pleaded. Drew reached for Natalie's phone with hesitant movements. Ben continued to shake his head before he saw his wife's eyes widen as she inspected the before and after pictures. "Are these real?" Drew asked with an astonished expression. "And untouched," Natalie answered with a nod. "Who would touch these?" Ben countered. "This is a real option," Drew said, cutting her husband off in the process. "For who?" Ben asked. "You could definitely pull this off," Drew answered. "Have you drank the Kool-Aid?" "This is real," Drew rejoined as held the photograph composite of a before and after shots. "Drew, I don't want to be a girl," Ben retorted, unable to believe he was having a conversation about feminizing himself with his wife and sister. "And I don't want to be a widow," Drew rejoined. "There has to be another way." "Name it," Drew demanded. Ben stared into his wife's eyes and sensed she was fighting off tears. Ben was silent for a few moments. Drew shook her head as she said, "You stay and you stay, Ben, you die. You go, you live. If you stay, but become someone else, you've got a real chance to live with us." Ben put his head down when he saw the tears coming down his wife's cheeks. He always hated the sight of her crying. He put his arm around her and tried to comfort her. Drew wiped away her tears before she said, "I need you to make a choice, Ben." "What do you have to lose?" Natalie asked. "My dignity." "It's not worth your life," Drew sniffed. Ben gazed at his sister and saw her nod her head in agreement. Ben scrunched his face before he asked, "What if it doesn't work?" "Then, we'll abort the idea." "You'll have to go." "I can't go." "Then, we have Tio make it work," Drew yelled before she buried her tear-stained face into her husband's shoulder. "Is Serena a talker?" Ben asked his sister while he stroked Drew's back. "She's chatty, but she's not loose-lipped. Discretion is her stock in trade, and she knows you're in trouble. She would do anything to help me." "You trust her?" "I'd trust her with my life," Natalie answered. Ben nodded to himself before he asked his wife, "You really want me to do this?" "I want you to go into hiding until it's safe," Drew countered. "That's not an..." "Then, I want you to do this," Drew replied, preventing her husband from finishing his sentence once more. Natalie gave Ben an expectant look before she asked, "Do you want me to call her?" "See what she can do," Ben said while he sat down and stared at the floor of Natalie's living room. Natalie left the room to make a phone call. Ben and Drew overheard the short conversation. Ben's head rose when he heard the word today come from his sister's excited lips. Ben gave his wife a nervous glance. She gave him a soft smile while she explained that would be for the best. Ben nodded to himself again. He wondered how the circumstances had played out to make her statement potentially true. Shortly thereafter, Natalie came over to them to tell them that Serena could squeeze him in that afternoon. The confirmation of his belief made Ben's stomach sink. He knew that he had little to no time to reconsider his choice to try Natalie's idea. With the decision made, Ben put on his makeshift disguise and started towards his sister's car. Natalie got into the driver's seat, while Ben sunk low in the back seat. Drew situated herself in the front passenger seat last before Natalie pulled away from her home. She made several evasive movements throughout the drive to see if anyone was tailing them. Relieved to find that no car continued on their path, Natalie parked in front of Serena's shop feeling that her brother would be safe. Ben walked into the shop with knots in his stomach. He doubted that Serena could make anything approximating a woman out of him. He was certain that men like him could not make a respectable-looking woman. Natalie hit the bell and waited for Serena to emerge and greet them. Serena gave her friend a wide smile and a hug before she greeted Ben. Ben had not seen the girl in years. She maintained much of the youthful attractiveness he remembered her having to his dismay. While he was happily married, the idea that an attractive woman would be helping to conceal his masculinity behind layers of frills and lace made him sick to his stomach. As Serena finished her greetings with Drew, she turned her attention to Ben. She looked him up and down and said, "I can work with this." You think you can make him look believable? Drew inquired. We call it passable in my line of work, Serena explained with a smile before she added, he'll definitely be passable when I'm done with him. He's always had such great bone structure. I was always interested to see how he would. Serena, this is very serious. We can't let anyone know who he really is, Drew explained, fearing the confident woman was missing the gravity of the situation. Natalie told me all about it. It's like I promised her, his own mother wouldn't be able to tell he was ever anything but a woman by the time I'm done with him. Ben doubted that very much, but there was no such test possible in his life anymore. Drew nodded as she made clear, this is a matter of life and death. Don't worry, when Ben's hiding in plain sight in nylons, no one will be any the wiser. Who said I'm wearing nylons? Ben interjected as he crossed his arms, disgusted by the thought of wearing such a dainty garment. You have to look professional, Natalie answered. I can look professional in pants, Ben countered. You have to get away from the Ben look, Natalie explained. Ladies, don't worry. Ben won't look the slightest thing like himself by the time you leave today, Serena assured them. Are you sure? Ben asked. Serena responded with a nod before she waved for him to follow her into her back room. Ben removed his makeshift disguise and waited for Serena to tell him what he was going to do next. Okay, Ben. I'm going to need you to strip. What was that? Ben asked, reflexively crossing his arms as he did so. We're going to need to wax you, Serena noted with a casualness that took Ben aback. For what? Ben inquired with alarm. You need to be smooth for the prosthetics to really get a good seal on your skin, Serena answered. Serena gave Ben a motion to speed up taking off his clothes. Ben looked at his wife. She shrugged since she had no frame of reference to confirm if what Serena was saying was true, but she had no reason to doubt the girl. Ben removed each article of his clothing until he was standing before the girls clad only in his black briefs. Serena gave Ben's muscled body no discernible reaction before she motioned for him to lie upon the table. With a fluttering stomach, Ben forced his body onto the table and lied down face up. Serena made small talk with the girls while she began to apply the wax to his legs. Ben looked at his wife and asked, "Is this going to hurt?" At first, she answered with a grimace. It gets easier with time, Serena noted. This is going to be a one-time thing, Ben replied, sure that the criminal enterprise was going to collapse once the boss was convicted. Natalie and Drew gave each other looks that conveyed that they did not share Ben's optimism. Ben wanted to inquire about the meaning conveyed by their expressions, but he felt the pull of the first strips from his legs first. Ben yelped, prompting bemused laughs from the girls. Ben gave his wife and sister an angry glare before Drew explained, I'm sorry, baby, I just know I handle the pain better. Well, you're used to it, Ben retorted. I didn't shout that loud my first time, Drew rejoined. Me either, Natalie added. If it's any consolation, a lot of guys can't tough it out like girls, Serena interjected. That's not any consolation, at all, Ben countered, feeling weak in front of the wife and younger sister he had spent years protecting. Serena nodded before she pulled the next strip. Ben winced, but he managed to keep his whining to a minimum. Serena continued waxing away his body hair while she talked with Ben's sister and wife. Ben felt like an afterthought, except when Serena instructed him to move his body around so she could complete her work. Once the waxing was finished, Drew started approaching his body with molds. Ben gave her a curious look. Before Ben could even ask a question, Serena explained, I'm going to make a mold of your torso and neck so that I can create forms that are going to hide everything just so. That sounds expensive. Ben began to complain. This is your life we're talking about, Drew reminded her husband, irritated that he was thinking about money under such extenuating circumstances. Ben apologized before Serena began to prepare his body for the molds. She lubricated his skin before she applied the plaster. Drew and Natalie looked on with interest while they saw Ben's body being covered. The process was intriguing to them, even as it was somewhat disconcerting for Ben. Ben tried to think about anything other than the end goal of what was being done to him. It was hard to do as his wife and sister could not help but talk about his feminization. Serena noticed his unease and irritation over their conversations. She smiled softly at the two women as she advised, "You ladies don't have to be here. We don't want to leave you," Drew replied while Serena finished making a mold of Ben's chest. "Don't worry. I've got this. He's going to take a while." "Well, we have other things we need to work on for him," Drew admitted before she asked her husband, "Are you going to be okay by yourself?" "I'll be fine," Ben responded, peeved about being spoken to like a child. "If you need anything." "I'll be fine," Ben repeated, unable to hide his displeasure over the question. Drew and Natalie took the hint and left Ben with Serena to continue his feminization in private. "Do you mind if I put on some music?" Serena asked while she began to make a mold of his neck. "Please," Ben replied, hoping the music would soothe him. The music did just that while Serena continued the painstaking process of making molds of the various sections of his body. Serena's work was at times a mere nuisance for Ben, while at other times it was unpleasant. He hated the muffled sound of Serena's phone conversation with his sister, but he said not a word about it when Serena returned her attention to him. Still, nothing was more mortifying to Ben than when he had to stand nude so that she could make an accurate mold of his crotch and rear. As Serena began to wrap his crotch in plaster, Ben felt the need to note, "It's cold in here." A small smile came to Serena's face as she heard the familiar words from a patron before she said, "I know." Ben stammered with blushing cheeks while he added, "It's typically." "Ben, you don't have to impress me," Serena interjected with a laugh. "I know, it's just humiliating for you to be having your dick wrapped in plaster by your sister's friend." "Yeah. When you put it that way, it's even worse," Ben admitted with a nervous laugh. "Look, this stays between us. As far as I'm concerned, right now, you're just another girl." "We both know that's not true," Ben responded in a sheepish tone. "That's not the way I like to think about it. I like to think that I bring out the girl in a boy," Serena rejoined as she continued about her business. "But I'm still going to be Drew's husband. Ben is her husband, and, between us girls, Drew tells me he's well endowed." "Well, in the right conditions," Ben replied with blushing cheeks. "He's also pretty good in the sack, but we don't want him knowing that his wife talks about that sort of thing with his sister's friends." "I wish she would talk about that sort of thing with my friends," Ben responded with a laugh. "You have the same girlfriends, now," Serena rejoined before she went about completing the mold. The return of his underwear brought back a small degree of modesty to him, but he felt that the damage of his sister's friend seeing him nude was done. Still, he kept his mouth shut and only spoke when she asked a question while she continued to make more molds and paused to prepare the prostheses from them. As she told him she was finished with the final mold, Ben inquired, "What about the rest of my legs?" "You don't need anything there. Your legs are big enough that they'll match the rest of your body." "But that's muscle?" "You put them in a pair of tights and it'll be hard to tell the difference between fat and muscle." Ben nodded, believing that it might be true. "Don't worry. Everyone is going to look at your body and think that you've got thunder thighs, not muscle tone," Serena joked. "Great," Ben replied with blushing cheeks. Serena laughed at the intended result of her light teasing before she said, "Just wait here while I finish making your next piece." Ben nodded as Serena left him again to begin preparing the final prostheses. Once she finished, she returned to the room with the prostheses that had been completed. Ben looked over the flesh-colored mass that was moving about in Serena's hands. Serena told him to lie still as she worked the mask over his face and neck. She glued it in place and made sure that it was holding on firm before she left Ben alone with his thoughts. Once she re-entered the room, Serena told Ben to stand up as she brought the torso piece over to him next. Ben looked at the heavy jiggling mass with a slack jaw. He could not believe how realistic it looked. As Ben got to his feet, he saw the mirror across the room. From a distance, he could not recognize himself from the neck up. His thick neck concealed any trace of an Adam's apple, while his skin looked smooth but lightly wrinkled from age. He sensed he was staring at the face of a fat woman who was a good 10 years his senior. Holy shit, Ben mumbled to himself, for the first time letting himself believe the ruse might truly work. Take off the boxers and step into this, Serena ordered. Ben cringed as he said, "It's really cold in here." "I won't look, just tell me when I can open my eyes," Serena responded before she added, "Just make sure your dick goes into the sleeve." "What sleeve?" "This one," Serena answered Ben's question while she pointed into the very bottom of the prosthetic. Ben nodded as Serena closed her eyes. While she stood in the room with her eyes closed, Ben removed his boxers and moved his legs through the torso piece that had been combined with his crotch mold to form a single prosthesis as he pulled it up his body. Ben watched in the mirror as the latex jiggled with the massive chest resting over his stomach. It was heavy and pulled his body forward as he worked his arms through the holes. As Ben's crotch neared the portion of the prosthetic running between his legs, he reached up into the piece and positioned his manhood into the sleeve Serena had shown him. "It's on," Ben said with some displeasure as they saw the way the piece hit his toned body behind layers of fake fat. Ben twisted his head to and from the side while he glanced across the room at his reflection in the mirror. Ben felt that he looked every inch a fat girl. He was as unrecognizable as a woman as the girls had promised. He was the type of woman that his eyes passed over. There were always better-looking and fitter options for a man like him. He knew that those days were gone for his near future. The best he could hope for was that his wife would remain blissfully unaware of his adultery and find a way to pleasure him. Ben cringed while Serena looked over handiwork and said, "I did a good job on you." Ben could only nod as he saw no trace of the man that had entered her place of business that day. He was in disbelief by how real everything on him looked. Even as he looked down right at his massive breasts, he could not tell from a visual inspection that they were fake. The only giveaway was where his arms and legs met the edges of the prosthesis. The legs tapered slightly down near his crotch and were not too noticeable. He figured that they would be unseen when he wore clothing, but the arms were clearly noticeable to him. Serena watched with a smirk as Ben's hands lingered to his sides. He was afraid to touch what was beneath his eyes. It was something he knew should not be there. "You can touch it," Serena said, reading his worries correctly. "It doesn't feel right," Ben replied. "It's yours." "It's not like you're touching some other woman's chest," Serena noted with a smile. "Right," Ben said with a nod between heavy breaths. His hands trembled while he brought them up over his protruding fake stomach that moved with his touch. His hands froze as they reached the base of the slightly sagging breasts. He had never felt breasts like them before. Every girl he had slept with had pert breasts, real or fake. None were ever as large as the ones he was sporting at the moment. His hands pulled away with disgust before Serena counseled, "I know they're not Drew's, but that doesn't make it cheating." "I know," Ben admitted, feeling ashamed by the fact that they were not the second pair of breasts he had felt since his wedding night. "You have to get used to them," Serena advised. Ben clenched his eyes and fists. With a slow nod, Ben brought his hands back up to his breasts. His fingers pressed down into the fake flesh and felt the softness. It felt nearly like his wife's. Ben's eyes widened as he squeezed the breasts. The familiar feelings in his hands were not bringing about the same aroused results when he did such things to another girl. They were bringing only shame that he was touching his own breasts. As Ben's hands dropped from his breasts, Serena said, "Hold still." Ben froze as he saw the bra in her hands. She smiled as she said, "This should give your back a little break. It doesn't feel bad. Trust me. With breasts that big, it's going to start to hurt quick if you keep letting them bounce around." Ben nodded, having heard similar complaints from women in the past. He watched as Serena hooked the bra around his back and felt the instant relief of the shift of the burden of the weight on his chest to his shoulders. "How does that feel?" "Better," Ben admitted. "See, you should always listen to a woman when you're questioning the right way to be a woman." "That was never something that ever crossed my mind," Ben replied with honesty. "Well, things change." "Because shit happens," Ben rejoined, still irritated by the situation that had led him to this degrading shift in his life. "Everything happens for a reason," Serena advised while she went to retrieve his arm prosthetics. "That's just what people tell themselves to not feel like shit," Ben muttered to himself, unable to feel anything but despondent over his situation. Once Serena returned, Ben slipped his arms through the prosthetics that tapered towards his hands. The additional girth hit his toned muscles and made his hands less obviously large. "I still have man hands," Ben fretted while he looked down at them. "Some girls have them, some girls don't." "There's nothing we can do about that," Serena countered. Ben nodded, knowing that her words were true. Ben watched as Serena showed him how to apply makeup to better conceal the seams of his prosthetics. Ben observed her efforts on the first arm and practiced on himself by doing the second and where his legs met his torso prosthetic. Once he finished, Ben was instructed on how he would be able to go to the bathroom. Serena brought Ben's hands to his rear. Ben's eyes widened as he felt the large, squishy, round butt cheeks that were concealing his muscle-toned ass. Serena's hands forced Ben's fingers into his fake butt crack as she said, "You can go and clean yourself just like you used to." "Like I do," Ben corrected her. "Well, that's if you can hold it until you're home alone and know that no one is watching," Serena counseled. Ben hated to admit that she was right, but there was not a doubt about it in his mind. Serena then smiled and said, "And you can tinkle just like a woman too." Ben cringed at the thought and Serena's choice of words while he saw Serena's hands reaching for his fake vagina. She moved her hands about his front as she said, "The sleeve bottoms out into your vajayjay, so you can pee sitting down, and I also added a lubricated vaginal canal for penetration." "Why the fuck would you do that?" Ben asked as his right hand jolted up and bumped into his ample chest. "I do it for every trans girl that comes in here. It's a force of habit," Serena admitted with a shrug. "Well, there will be no penetration here," Ben countered, certain of the fact. "Right," Serena said with a smile and a nod. As her fingers moved away from his fake vagina, Ben was given a pair of panties. Ben hurried to step into them to give himself a little modesty. "How did you have my size?" Ben asked while he glanced in the mirror at the curvy woman whose motions were mirroring his. "Once Natalie told me about this, I was able to take an educated guess about how big you would have to be passable." Ben processed the explanation before Serena added, "When you've done this as long as me, you can eyeball a girl's shoulders and know how big her hips should be. It's all about the ratio. With shoulders like yours, you have to be a big girl. There's just no other way." "I never saw myself as being a fat girl," Ben joked. "You're not fat, sweetie," Serena instinctively responded, trying to console him. "I know it's all fake," Ben replied. "Right," Serena responded as her instinct gave way to facts. She then smiled while she handed him adhesives and solvents. She advised him that while the torso prosthetics and arm prosthetics would largely stay in place, the edges would need to be glued down, as did his face. She told him that the adhesive would hold for days, but the solvents would break them down in a matter of minutes. Ben was relieved that he was in the hands of such an experienced and knowledgeable technician. He believed that the woman had thought of everything, but, then again, he figured that it was part of her job. It was not long after he finished pulling on his underwear that he heard the door to the shop open. Ben's heart started to race as he heard his wife call out for Serena. The sound of her voice was met by welcome relief. It meant that he was safe for the moment. It was his wife and sister returning, instead of killers ready to add him as another notch on their gunstock. Ben heard a knock and turned towards the door while he heard his sister ask, "Is Ben decent?" "She's more than that. She's presentable," Serena answered with a self-assured look. With that response, Natalie and Drew entered the room and came to a stop. Their eyes widened while they looked over Ben. They both struggled with the urge to laugh as they saw him cutting the image of a plump, middle-aged woman in her intimates. Given his hair, Ben looked a bit like the kind of girl he would often complain did not take care to ensure that she was looking good. Drew gave in to her urges to laugh before Natalie joined her. Ben shook his head as he said through gritted teeth, "It's not that funny." "I can't believe that's you," Drew replied, missing that Ben's tone had changed. "Oh, my God, you're an artist," Natalie told Serena with a sense of wonder. "I take pride in my work," Serena said with a nod, believing that Ben had been another successful transformation. Drew shook her head before she said, "At least I know that you won't be cheating on me." "I would never cheat on you," Ben lied. "I know, but it's going to be tough." "What?" Ben asked, unsure where she was going with her statement. Drew sighed before she said, "We made arrangements." "For what?" "Your living situation." "Why?" "You can't live with me. Everyone would." "So, you're throwing me out?" "No. We rented you a nice place." "Rent?" "You're going to be paid by the company. This place takes cash for rent and it's on a bus line." "Bus line?" Ben asked with confusion. "You can't drive." "Why the hell not?" Ben protested. "Because you don't look like the man on your license," Natalie reminded him. "And your insurance and registration can't be traced back to you or us," Drew added. "You expect me to take the bus to work? It's not that bad of a trip." "We got you a bus map," Drew answered. Ben took it with disbelief. He shook his head before he asked, "And when am I moving there?" "It's going to be ready for you tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Ben shrieked, surprised by the immediacy of the move. "It's fully furnished, and we picked up some bedding for you," Drew explained. "And some clothing," Natalie added. "Are you telling me that I can't live with you anymore?" Ben asked, despondent about living separately from his wife. "Well, no. I want you to come home as soon as you can, but we need certain things to happen first." "But what if they don't happen?" Ben asked, finally admitting the possibility that it might never be safe for him to live as Ben Cunningham. "I'll have to come out as a lesbian," Drew noted with a sad smile. "That's your plan? Do you have a better one?" Drew countered. Ben shook his head before he said, "So, I only have a day with you two." "With me," Serena interjected. Ben gave her a curious look before Natalie explained, "Serena volunteered to take you in for the night. Her partner's away on a business trip, so it'll just be you two girls." "Why?" Ben asked, ignoring Natalie's choice of pronouns. "We can't have you coming to our homes right after Ben disappeared," Drew explained to her husband. "Don't talk about me like I'm not here. You're not Ben. We can't call you Ben. We can't do anything but call you Melissa." "Melissa? That's the name we created for you for Erica." "You told Erica?" "She has to know about the new girl we hired. She's the one who'll make sure you're paid." "But I'm..." Ben began to reply, unsure of how to finish his sentence. "You're Melissa Luffman. You're a 45-year-old woman." "That's your cover," Natalie noted in a matter-of-fact tone. Ben gave her a quiet nod. He cast his eyes down and realized how bad his situation was and how far it was spiraling out of control. "Let's get you dressed," Drew said with a hint of resignation while she handed Ben a shopping bag. Ben looked at the various garments and was unsure where to begin. "Start with the leggings," Drew advised. "Aren't I a little big?" "Plenty of girls your size wear them," Natalie chided. "It doesn't mean they should wear them," Ben rejoined, feeling self-conscious. "Not all girls are a size 0, Natalie retorted, having grown tired of her brother's fat-shaming over the years. "Such as Melissa here," Drew added with a smile. "We all know this is fake," Ben countered. "True, but most people are going to see you as what you call a fat girl," Natalie explained, enjoying that fact. "Don't remind me." "Oh, I will take pleasure in reminding you," Natalie rejoined. "It's not like you're really fat," Drew added, trying to raise Ben's spirits. "You teased me for it when we were growing up," Natalie interjected. "That was decades ago." "Get over it," Ben countered his sister. "You started it at school." "In elementary school, by high school I was beating people up that fucked with you," Ben rejoined. "Yeah, all right," Natalie replied with a shrug, acknowledging the truth of his declaration. "Melissa, it's time to get dressed," Drew interjected as she looked at her watch. Ben recoiled at the name his wife called him. Still, he forced himself to nod while he asked how to put on the leggings. The girls gave each other glances before Ben reminded them, "I am new at this." "Cut me some slack." Natalie told him to roll down the leggings and step into them. Ben did as he was told and brought the soft fabric up his legs. Ben's manhood tried to swell from the feeling, causing Ben's cheeks to turn red. He was happy that the prosthetic mask was concealing his true emotions, even as the displeasure from the crushing of his manhood's attempts to expand was clear on his wincing face. Drew gave him a curious look as she asked, "What's wrong?" "This is not something I expected to deal with," Ben deflected with a truthful answer while he struggled to bring the leggings up to his widened hips. "Girls, we really need to get a move on. It's getting late, and I have a lot more work to do with her," Serena interjected. "Sorry," Drew replied. Serena did not respond as she put a cape around Ben's neck and began to shape his scraggly hair into a short female cut. Ben hated short hair on a woman, but, from the complaints he had overheard over the years, he was certain that it would be easier to maintain. Once the cut was finished, Serena began adding highlights and tinting to his hair while the girls continued to watch. Ben struggled to stay still as he felt that everything around him was moving too fast. He had been a successful businessman and a fit ladies' man when he walked into the shop. Now, he was sporting a woman's, colored haircut, a portly frame that evidenced a love of sweets over workouts and the face of a woman of middle age. Ben wondered what he had ever done to deserve being forced into such a situation while he was brought over to the sink to wash out the chemicals that had been used to color his hair. Once they were washed from his hair, Serena brought Ben back over to the chair and blow-dried his hair, styling it as she went. Ben took mental notes as Serena worked on him and told him how to care for and style his dyed hair. Ben nodded as she finished and told him that she would give him some shampoos designed to preserve the life of the artificial coloring in his hair. Ben forced himself to thank her, even as he wanted to throw up about having to use the same products his wife utilized. Once Serena finished her explanation about his hair, she let Ben finish getting dressed. He took the dark blue sweater dress from his wife with a look of displeasure. "What's wrong?" Drew asked. "It's a little girly," Ben complained with a scowl at the dress's horizontally, white-striped, bell sleeve, V-neck and hemline. "Sorry, we couldn't find any manlier dresses," Natalie retorted to the other girls' laughter. As the laughter dissipated, Ben decided to not fight the situation any longer and pulled the dress over his head. He struggled to bring it down over his large, jiggling chest. He felt the unusual softness of his body as he forced the cotton fabric of the dress over his protruding stomach. Once he finished moving his hands through the flared sleeves, he reached behind himself to ensure that his portly rear was covered by the knee-length hem of the dress. Ben then stepped into the pair of black ballet flats the girls had bought for him to pair with the outfit. Ben felt strange standing before his wife and sister as a fully dressed, middle-aged woman. The normal superiority he felt around his younger sister was gone. In his mind, there was no question whom was more appealing to the opposite sex at that moment. He had loved being a ladies' man, while his sister had few relationships. Now, she was in the situation to still get dates, while Ben was left only to his wife to the extent that she could even look beyond his feminized disguise. Natalie and Drew gave Ben approving nods while they complimented Serena on her work again. Ben hated to hear them talk about him as if he was a woman or someone other than their brother or husband. "I love the facial work," Drew said. "Well, I knew he wouldn't get the makeup down on his own, so I had to do something permanent to the latex." "So, Melissa won't have to touch it up?" Drew asked. "Nope. The mask goes on and she's done." "Lucky bitch," Natalie joked. "I don't feel lucky," Ben interjected while he pulled down on his dress's knee-length, A-line hem. The action made the girls laugh more than his words. Serena called Ben over to her and said, "Fan out your nails." "Why?" "I'm going to paint them," she explained while she pointed at the tabletop where he should rest his palms. After everything that had happened to him that day, he did not hesitate to rest his hands. He hated the fact that his sister and wife were sitting there laughing and talking while his nails were being painted. He was sure that their every whisper was at his expense. Once his nails were finished being coated with dark brown nail polish, Serena told Ben to walk to the mirror. Ben approached it with hesitant steps as Serena told him to wave his hands about and blow on his nails to expedite their drying. Natalie and Drew struggled not to laugh while they watched Ben comply with the order. Natalie whispered into Drew's ear, "He looks like such a queer." But he's my queer, Drew retorted. Different strokes, Natalie said with a shake of her head as Ben came to a stop before the mirror. Soon thereafter, Serena gave Ben's nails an approving nod while she asked Ben, "Are you ready to meet Melissa Luffman?" "Haven't I already?" Ben asked while he looked into the mirror in front of his face. "No. I mean the full-length view. You need to see yourself from all sides," Serena replied as she helped steady Ben while he felt the weight of his new curves pulling him forward with every step he took. Ben approached the platform containing 3 mirrors with hesitant steps. He gave the girls a pensive look while he asked, "Is this really necessary?" "What's the matter? You can't handle it?" Natalie teased. "No. I can do it. I just don't think I need to see this from every damn angle," Ben countered as he pointed down at his widened body. "It's best that you get acquainted with every angle, since girls have to account for that sort of thing," Serena lectured to Natalie in Drew's agreement. Ben nodded to himself as he approached the mirrors and stood in the center of them. His eyes widened as he examined himself from multiple angles. He could not believe that it was his reflection staring back at him, complete with chubby cheeks, wrinkles, a round waistline and breasts that would have looked comedic on girls with frames he went for. Ben was shocked by the totality of the changes. He doubted that anyone alive would be able to put the connection between Ben Cunningham and Melissa Luffman together. In his mind, they were nothing alike. As Ben continued to gaze into the mirror, Serena told the girls her work was done. Drew and Natalie took the hint and approached Ben. Ben gave them both a nervous look. Natalie wrapped her arms around her brother and was amazed that she could no longer reach her arms around him entirely. She kissed him on the cheek and said, "We'll see you on Wednesday." Ben nodded before Drew came over to him. He gave her a hug before their lips lingered near one another's. Ben could tell that Drew was unsure what to do. She forced her eyes closed and brought her lips to his. Ben reciprocated with what he felt was the most awkward kiss since his teenage years. Once their lips parted, Drew and Natalie said goodnight to Serena before they headed out of the shop. Ben helped Serena close up the shop before she drove him to her home. They had a quick meal together and headed for bed. Ben went to the guest room that Serena had made up for him and thanked her for her hospitality. "I'll do anything for a friend," Serena replied. Ben smiled in response before he said goodnight to her. As Ben rolled over the next morning, he struggled to focus his eyes as he hoped that the day before had been nothing but a nightmare. The unfamiliar room, however, made clear to him that it was not to be. He felt a familiar sense of despair come over him. It had been something that had been coming over him since he saw the crime. Telling his story to the authorities made him feel slightly better, but the accidental disclosure of his name had made the despondency a constant companion. Realizing that wallowing in his despair was doing him no favors, Ben forced himself out of the bed. Ben was thrown off kilter as the massive weight of his glued-on prosthetics that he was not used to feeling while he got out of bed. "Why did I sleep with this on?" Ben muttered before remembering that he found it easier than taking it off. After steadying himself, Ben winced at his portly-looking frame, hating the sight of the heavy-set girl he was being forced to pretend to be. He covered himself up in the black, sateen robe that Drew and his sister had bought him before he exited his bedroom. Ben stepped into the shower that Serena had shown him the day before as he removed his robe. Ben washed himself as quickly as he could, hating the feeling of the soft, bulging masses on his torso that moved about like putty beneath his hands. Once he finished, Ben hurried back into the bedroom to get dressed. While he was unhappy about having to dress as a woman, he felt that his body was slightly less revolting when it was covered. Ben looked through the various garments that his wife and sister had bought him the day before. He struggled to put together the outfit that he felt was the least offensive to his concealed masculinity. While he was relieved to find a pair of pants in the bags, Ben winced at how feminine every one of his tops struck him as being. Ben tried to put that thought out of mind while he stepped into the pants. Ben was surprised by how loose the legs of the black palazzo pants were as he brought them up his legs and let go of the elastic waist. He hated the cutwork lace trim that started just below his knee and ended at his ankles. Still, while the pants struck him as overly girly, he figured they were less emasculating than wearing another dress or a skirt. With a sigh, Ben then selected the top that he felt was the least feminine and pulled it over his head. As he brought the polyester/spandex black handkerchief t-shirt down over his stomach, Ben's eyes widened at the reflection he caught in Serena's guest room mirror. Ben's eyes were instinctively drawn to the small amount of cleavage that was visible above the form-fitting top's U-neckline. The lace-trimmed detailing that was resting over his legs was far more obvious than he assumed as well. "Damn it," Ben exclaimed before he hurried to pull his arms free from the three-quarter sleeves of the top while he pulled it off his body to exchange it for the other plain black top in the bag. Ben took hold of the polyester/spandex keyhole top and gave it a weary look. As his arms emerged from the long sleeves, he pulled at the mock neckline that was failing to fully cover his substantial cleavage too. "You've got to be kidding me," Ben groused while the neckline descended back into its resting position. In Ben's mind, the lace detailing on his shoulders seemed to be framing his cleavage to draw even more attention to it. "Fucking Nadine," Ben muttered, sure his sister had selected the degrading top before he removed it and stared at his last black option. "Motherfucker," Ben exclaimed with a look of disgust at the black, baby doll top that was decorated with fishnet inserts over his upper arms and where his cleavage had been exposed by the other tops. The red rose embroidery over his shoulders and running down to the center of his bust seemed unnecessary to him as well. Ben cursed himself, sure that his sister had selected every item in the bags. He figured his wife was too dazed by the situation to allow herself to select items that would be less embarrassing for her husband to sport. Ben pulled the top over his head. He gave himself a slight smile once he noticed that the rounded neck and fishnet insert above it had effectively concealed his cleavage. With a shake of his head, Ben straightened out the top before he bent down to put on his shoes. After Ben slipped his feet into the bow-adorned, black ballet flats that he had worn the prior night, he walked towards the kitchen where he found Serena standing. She gave him a smile as she looked over his attempt to put together an outfit. She gave him an approving nod as she said, "That outfit actually matches." "Thanks, I tried to base it on what I've seen my wife wear," Ben admitted with blushing cheeks. "Well, Drew always used style whenever I saw her," Serena replied before she offered him a bowl of cereal. Ben was happy to take it from her as he sat down and ate at her table. As he ate, Serena moved beside the table and began telling him about their day together. Ben was surprised that his wife and sister had paid Serena to shut down her shop the entire day to give him a crash course in femininity. What Serena was telling him they were going to do seemed, to him, to be a lot to accomplish in a single day. "So, I'm going to learn to be a girl in 3 easy lessons?" Ben joked, trying to preserve his sanity. "I wouldn't say they're easy," Serena countered. "What do you mean?" "You need to strike the right balance. It's very important for you to be believable to strangers. It's a lot to accomplish in a. Melissa, you don't have the luxury of time. Your life, literally, is on the line here." Ben hung his head, feeling his latex-covered chin pressing into his massive breasts as he did so. The feeling made Ben's head jerk upwards as he admitted she was right. "Okay, so don't fight me," Serena chided. "I won't." "Good. When I'm done with you, you will know how to not allow yourself to be so obvious to be seen through." Ben nodded in reply to her words. "So, that means no wide stance in a skirt," Serena lectured. "Okay. I can do that," Ben stated, sure in the fact. "And no over-the-top girly stuff either. That's another dead giveaway." "I don't understand." "Don't act like a sissy, act like a girl." "What's the difference?" "One's a girl, one's an effeminate guy trying to act like some outdated girly stereotype." "Can you explain?" "Sure. Sissies wear petticoats." "I don't know what those are," Ben countered. "That's a good first step," Serena noted before continuing. "Sissies walk around with their limp wrists out in front of them and their makeup way overdone." "Again, not happening," Ben added. "See that it doesn't," Serena noted before drilling him on how to talk. Ben struggled to keep his tone high, yet soft. He added hand movements while they chatted as they collected his belongings and headed out of Serena's home. They filled up Serena's car and Serena made him continue talking to her with his hand gestures and airy tone while she drove them. Once they reached the apartment building, Serena opened her trunk and helped Ben carry his bags towards the front door. Ben inserted the keys that he had been given the day before and felt deflated while he looked up at the old staircase. "It's a walk up," Ben noted with a shake of his head. "What do you think a secretary can afford?" Serena countered before adding, "You should consider yourself lucky you can afford a place of your own at all." "I suppose," Ben replied while he started up the steps, relieved that he was wearing flats. Once they reached the landing of the third floor, Ben walked down the corridor with Serena behind him while he searched for his apartment number. Ben paused as he looked at the door that appeared to have not seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. As Ben turned the key, the door opened with a creak before Ben and Serena walked inside the apartment. If anything, Ben felt that his quarters were even less impressive than the dated building as he looked around. Serena locked the door behind them. She then followed Ben through the apartment and talked to him while he looked around his new home. Ben's eyes looked over his small living room/dining room area before he lingered by the sole entryway into the galley kitchen. Ben felt that it would be difficult for him to even walk through the kitchen, given the narrowness of the area between the parallel rows of cabinets and appliances. Ben's mind drifted to wistful thoughts about his home with Drew. The great room alone was larger than his entire living area for the near future. It almost seemed like a different life to him. The luxuries and realities of that home were far removed from him now. While he could revert to that man at a moment's notice, there was no real possibility of him being able to do so. With that thought in mind, Ben passed by the bathroom door and peered inside. The old yellow tiles struck him as 70s era, 80s at the latest. He tried not to think about it while he went into the single bedroom in the rear of the apartment. Serena followed him into the room, watching his continued lack of obvious emotion. She figured that he was stunned by the sudden changes in his life, which had been completely turned on its head. "Are you okay?" Serena asked while she put a bag down and began to hang up items from Ben's new wardrobe. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ben forced himself to reply while he put his bags down. "Melissa, it's okay if this is a little much for you." "I said I'm fine," Ben retorted, instinctively not wanting to show any weakness in front of an attractive girl. Serena figured that his male ego was forcing him to respond as such. She realized from the look in his eyes that the reality of his new life as a working-class, middle-aged woman was a little much for him to handle at once. Ben tried to put his negative thoughts aside while he helped Serena put away his new clothing in his dresser and closet. With each item he put away, Ben examined its fabric and girlish design. Drew and Natalie had seen to every detail about his feminized state. They had made sure that his wardrobe would be the best that a woman in his situation could afford. As he put away the last bra and panty set in his intimates drawer, Ben took a few steps backwards and rested his large, padded rear on the edge of his bed. Ben's hand pressed against the comforter he recognized from Natalie's guest room. Second hand from a guest room, Ben muttered to himself as he stood up and saw Serena giving him a curious look. "Well, now that we've got you settled in, why don't you put on a pair of heels for me?" Serena asked while she reached for a pair of white, patent leather pumps. "Why?" Ben inquired, unable to hide his disgust at the thought of wearing them. "You need to learn to walk in them for work," Serena explained what she felt should be self-obvious. "I could wear flats," Ben protested. "Are flats professional?" Serena countered. "No," Ben acknowledged her point with a nod. He had never looked kindly on a woman wearing flats in a professional setting. He knew that he would be held to that same judgmental standard. Ben clenched his eyes before he took the cone-heeled shoes from her. He slipped his feet into each of the 2.75-inch heel pumps, balancing himself against the wall while he situated each foot beneath him. He continued to balance himself as he stood up and listened to Serena's instructions about how to land his feet. Ben paced a few steps before pivoting as Serena advised. Serena nodded at Ben's ability to closely follow directions. "You're picking this up faster than most women do," Serena noted with a smile. "I was an athlete," Ben replied, even as the truth of his statement seemed absurd while he looked down at his large, womanly frame. "Although, you'd never know it to look at me," Ben added with a sullen look. "It's okay, Melissa. You know why you have to look this way. It's because we need to hide all that muscle. I would have been better off being a 120-pound girly boy. I don't think your wife would like that. Well, I certainly don't like this, Ben countered with his right pointer finger directed at his large bust. Serena gave him a sympathetic look while she had him continue to walk around the apartment in his glossy, white pumps. Ben stepped from the rugged areas to the ceramic-tiled flooring in the bathroom and the linoleum-tiled kitchen with relative ease, only wobbling on a few steps in the over an hour she kept him on his heeled feet. While his feet and ankles grew slightly pained from the process, Ben did his best to not exhibit any displeasure in front of Serena. He wanted to give off the impression that he was tough enough not to complain about his lot in life, no matter what happened to it. After Serena finished putting Ben through his paces, she told him that they would take a break for lunch. Ben was happy to go along with it and headed out of the apartment with her. Ben locked the door behind them and heard his heels clicking on the asbestos flooring of the common area. The sounds echoed about in the corridor before they came to the staircase. Ben felt a little uneasy approaching the steps before Serena instructed, "Take it slow. Just land your feet at an angle. You need your heel and your toe to land on each step." After acknowledging her advice, Ben put it into practice while he went down the first flight of stairs. He beamed as he looked at Serena and said, "That wasn't as bad as I thought." "Most of being a woman won't be," Serena whispered with a grin. Ben hoped that she was correct while he continued down the steps and exited the building with Serena in tow. The two walked to a nearby luncheonette that Serena was familiar with from when she lived in the neighborhood. Ben hemmed while he looked over his options. Given his apparent weight, Ben ordered a salad to Serena's amusement. "You know, you can't actually lose weight," Serena whispered as they sat. "It's a self-conscious decision," Ben admitted, knowing how much he had criticized portly women in his mind when they ordered non-lean dishes. They took a seat after getting their meals from the pickup counter. Ben felt good to get off his heeled feet. He smiled as his rear touched the seat, thankful for the instant relief he felt. Ben and Serena made small talk while they ate as Ben told her how much he looked forward to getting back to the office. Serena could only smile, wondering how the girls in the office would treat him now that he was, officially, one of them. After they finished eating, Serena walked with Ben to the bus stop that he would be using each morning to get from his apartment to the transfer station that would allow him to take a bus to a stop near his office. Ben was not happy about the prospect, but he knew that it had to be done since he could not drive a car in his current guise. Serena then directed Ben to a nearby grocery store. Ben nodded while he followed her through its front door. Ben gave the store's selections a cautious glance. Serena noticed Ben's expression and asked, "What's wrong?" "This doesn't look like the kind of stuff that Drew gets me." "That's because she's a big, rich executive." Ben gave Serena a sullen nod as she began to explain why she was selecting certain items. Ben made mental notes while he moved along with her as other customers hustled around them. "Everyone seems to be in a big hurry," Ben complained. "Well, a lot of these women have kids at home or jobs to get back to. They don't have the luxury of living alone and a day off," Serena chided. "I wouldn't exactly call them luxuries," Ben rejoined. Under other circumstances, Serena corrected herself with a sympathetic nod. "I suppose," Ben replied while he continued shopping beside Serena. Ben was surprised by the number of offerings that were available for him. Most of the brands that Drew bought were not available though. Based on Serena's chiding, he figured that they were probably high-end items that the small grocer could not afford to carry. As Ben backed up to avoid stepping on Serena while they meandered through the store, he felt a presence hurry away from him. Ben's head jerked towards the man. As he went to apologize, Ben heard the man mutter, "Watch it, fat ass." "That was rude," Ben sniffed at Serena. "It comes with the territory," Serena counseled, shaking her head at the comment. "I don't know how I'm going to get used to that." "Hopefully, you won't need to," Serena replied before adding, "Most people have a minimal level of decency to keep their mouths shut." Ben could only hope she was right. But he was sure that for every person who would say such a thing, there were 1,000 who would be thinking it about him. It was something he had been unable not to think whenever he saw a large woman. Now, As far as the rest of the world was concerned, he was amongst their ranks. Ben caught his reflection in the chrome of a display case. The distorted reflection made him look even larger. "I'm a fucking pig," Ben muttered to himself. "Hey, don't say that," Serena chided, overhearing him before she gave a comforting look and put her arm around his shoulder. "I'm sorry. This is so unreal to me," Ben admitted, struggling not to get teary-eyed. "It'll get easier," Serena counseled. Ben hoped that he would not have to find that to be true as Melissa Loveman. He wanted to be free of her and her life as soon as possible. Once Ben and Serena finished collecting everything Serena felt he needed, they headed for the checkout line. Ben could not believe the number of patrons to clerks. "This is so inefficient." "It's a cost saver, plus they're the only game in town," Serena advised while they moved up a step. Ben thought it was likely true enough, but he still did not like it. He was sure that the stores his wife shopped at were far more customer-friendly. Once they were called forward, Ben paid for the goods with cash, and they began the walk back to his new home. Ben wanted to get back to the safety of his apartment as quickly as possible. He was tired of the indifferent and judgmental looks he was getting from women and men who had kept themselves in shape. He was certain he could see the disdain in their eyes. It was something he had seen in himself too many times before to miss. Ben carried the bags down the block beside Serena. He was surprised by how heavy the bags were growing with each additional few feet. "There's got to be an easier way to do this," Ben whined. "Get a foldable shopping cart or just buy a few things at a time. It doesn't work when you're moving in, but going forward." "That makes sense," Ben replied while they made their way back to his building. Ben paused before the steps to the front door and asked, "And how do I do this?" Serena answered with a grin, "Either only walk on your toes or walk with your heels at an angle to fit your whole foot on each step." "How do you do it?" "Toes only, it's faster that way, but it takes a little more practice." Ben nodded before he began to put Serena's words into action. Ben stepped down on the first step, landing only his toes as his heel rested off the step before he did so with the other foot. Ben felt more confident with each step before he let himself into the building and repeated the process up to his walk-up apartment. As they went inside, Ben said, "I've been waiting to get these off for." "Nah, Serena chided with a wag of her finger. "Why not? You need to get used to wearing them for, 10 hours a day." "10 hours?" Ben asked for clarification. "An 8-hour workday, plus about an hour commute each way." "Come on! Doesn't every girl you work with deal with it?" "Yes," Ben forced himself to admit. "Well, Melissa, you're one of the girls, now. Thanks for the reminder. Did my sister pay you to do that?" Ben remarked while he put his head down. Serena laughed at him as she said, "Don't pout. You've got to keep your head up. That's easier said than done when your body is being dragged forward by dead weight," Ben rejoined as he cupped his weighty, faux bosoms. "Oh, stop bitching," Serena retorted. Ben closed his eyes and stared at the ceiling, realizing that that was all he was doing. He was making excuses when he was the kind of person that did not believe in making them. Ben told her she was right before he started into the kitchen. Ben was relieved to find that his hips made it through the middle of the kitchen, however, barely. He pivoted on his heels and started to put away the groceries. As he took a step back, Ben felt his butt pressing into a handle, causing him to jump forward and force his enlarged stomach into the counter before him. Serena could not help but laugh at the sight while Ben blushed and admitted, "That was not my finest moment." Serena shook her head as she helped him put away the remainder of his groceries before Ben waddled out of the kitchen. She smiled at Ben as she told him that she was going to help him learn to clean up after himself as well. Ben was surprised by the comment, but he realized that he would no longer have the luxury of a cleaning service. It would be too unusual for a woman in his position. Serena showed Ben his cleaning supplies before she put him to work under her tutelage. Ben learned how to use the vacuum cleaner, how to scrub a toilet and shower, and how to mop a floor. It was all simple enough for him to remember, but he could not wait for the day when he would be able to have other people handle it for him again. Ben's cleaning was only broken up by a trip to the bathroom. Ben locked the door and stared around the dated bathroom as he sat on the pink toilet that rested next to the pink porcelain tub and sink. Did the bitch think it was always Easter? Ben wondered as he looked around the yellow-colored walls that matched the pastel pink fixtures before he wiped himself, stood up, washed his hands and went back to cleaning. After Ben finished cleaning up around his apartment, Serena pulled out a recipe book for him and told him to make dinner. Ben gave her a wayward look and inquired, "Is this really necessary?" "You can't eat Weight Watcher dinners every night," she chided. Ben blushed as he remembered the prepared, boxed meals he bought for himself, feeling every inch the heavy-set woman he appeared to be as he did so. Ben looked through his grocery items and compared it to the recipes until he found a meal he could make. Ben took to making the meal while Serena watched from the entryway, unable to enter the kitchen with his large figure moving about in it. Ben struggled to move around the kitchen. He had to stand to the side of the refrigerator and stove whenever he opened them as there was no room for him to stand behind it. Ben hated the limitations imposed by his enlarged size and small dwelling, but he decided he could not let Serena see that. He forced himself to grit his teeth while he made them dinner before setting the table. Serena joined him for the meal that both felt was serviceable at best. Once they finished eating, Serena had Ben clean up after the meal. Ben walked into the kitchen and found that there was no dishwasher. Ben cursed under his breath before he hand-washed the pots, dishes, glasses and cutlery. He was certain that he would stick to prepared meals going forward. Once he finished, Serena motioned for Ben to come into the living room. Ben sat on the lumpy couch that had come with his apartment and stared at the television set. It was an older model with slightly distorted color, as well as a line burned into the picture. Ben tried to avoid looking at the line, but it was impossible while the fashionista on the television continued to talk about the latest styles. "What is this?" Ben inquired. "The Escape Network. It's a network for women your age. It'll be educational for you." "I don't think I need it," Ben countered. "I wouldn't be so sure. You're trying to pass yourself off as Melissa Luffman, right?" Ben nodded before Serena said, "Good. Now, I've got to get going, but I know you'll do me proud." "I'll try. For all our sakes, just make sure you pull it off," Serena rejoined. "I will," Ben affirmed to both Serena and himself. Serena hugged Ben before she said, "Good luck." "I've never needed luck," Ben rejoined. Serena nodded as she looked over his feminized disguise and thought, "You might want to rethink that." Ben then saw Serena out of his apartment and locked the door behind her. He turned and pivoted on his heels before he braced himself on the wall and immediately removed his shoes. "Thank God," Ben said to himself while he carried the shoes into the living room and put them on a table. He sat down on the couch and changed the channel to a college basketball game. For a moment, he was able to lose himself in the game. Things in his mind were as they should be, but every time he heard footsteps above his apartment or yelling through the walls, he was forced to confront the reality that nothing was as it should be. The surroundings made clear that things had gone very wrong in his life. Ben turned off the game and went into the bathroom. He quickly disrobed and turned on the shower. The sounds of the knocking pipes in the walls surprised him. He had heard people complain of them, but he never realized how annoying they could be. Ben was relieved that the sound ended soon enough while he began to lather his hands. He did not even want to look down as he washed the mixture of latex, his skin and his hair. He toweled off as fast as he could before he put on his robe and exited the bathroom. Ben went into the bedroom and selected his outfit for the following day. He made sure it was all accounted for, as Serena had recommended he do over dinner. Once he finished, Ben pulled off his robe and reached into a drawer to remove one of the cotton night dresses the girls had bought him. He slipped into it and got under the covers. His mind raced for a few minutes over what awaited him in the office before he found himself falling asleep. The following morning, Ben got up early and took a shower. He checked his body for visible hairs before he ensured that all of his prosthetics were still perfectly glued as he got out of the shower. Ben went into the bedroom and began to carefully dress himself in his intimates. He struggled to get the black lace bra to hook in front of his chest and felt the straps digging into his shoulders and back with his every tug. Ugh, Ben said with a disgusted shake of his head after another fumbling attempt. The fourth try proved successful once he hooked the first clasp. His hands raced to hook the remaining clasps before he loosened the two tight straps that were pressing into his flesh and forms. Ben stepped into his black, sheer pantyhose next. He followed the directions Serena had given him the day before as he situated his feet in each leg of the hosiery before he began to work it up his legs. The strange feelings of excitement the hosiery aroused in him turned his stomach. Ben shook his head as he paused and admonished his body, "Stop it, stop it." Despite his orders, his body continued to involuntarily react to the silky fabric that was being brought up both his legs. He wanted to scream as his manhood painfully engorged against the compression of his forms that was allowing no visible evidence of his evident arousal, beyond his shamed face. Once the control top of his pantyhose was at his hips, Ben stepped into the gray/black, three-quartered sleeved dress. He struggled to get it up and over his large chest before he reached behind his back to fasten the concealed rear zipper. This would be so much easier with help, Ben mumbled to himself, remembering how many times he had zipped up his wife's and girlfriend's dresses over the years. As his fingers pulled away from the zipper, Ben went into the bathroom, feeling the pull of the dress's knee-length hem with every step. He inspected the edges of the mask that was concealing his features. He applied glue to a loose edge and held it tightly to his neck while he looked over his hair. Once the glue had set, Ben moved his hands to the products that Serena had given him. Ben styled his hair as Serena had shown him how to do and gave himself an approving look at his efforts. "I think that's good enough," Ben said to himself while he washed his hands and returned to the bedroom. Ben walked over to his dresser and accessorized himself with a few pieces of jewelry that Serena, his wife and sister had collected for him. Ben slipped on a silver necklace with a large rhinestone-adorned pendant first. He adjusted it around his neck while the pendant and chain swung far down over the scoop neckline dress that concealed every inch of his cleavage and more. After he finished adjusting the necklace, Ben clipped a pair of earrings onto his earlobes. Ben felt the two dangling silver chains that descended from the dueling faux studs brushing against his neck with most movements of his head. Ben knew that the earrings would attract attention, but he was certain that was the point of all jewelry. Ben finished his outfit off with a silver and black watch on his right wrist and a ring for each hand. Ben was certain that none of the rings came from the girls' collections, since they were clearly selected with his larger finger sizes in mind. Once Ben finished slipping on the second ring, he went into his kitchen and ate a quick breakfast before he headed out the door. Ben made his way down the steps in the black, 3-inch-heeled, rounded toe pumps that he had waited to place on until the moment he drew his apartment door open. After he reached the landing of the first floor, he exited the building and started down the front stoop. The cool morning wind made Ben shiver as it went up his skirt, despite the hosiery and prosthetics that were giving his skin an extra buffer. Ben crossed his arms over his ample bust while he hurried away from his building. His eyes watched the sidewalk, careful to know exactly where his feet would land, the importance of which Serena had drilled into him the day before. He adjusted the strap of his purse as he reached the bus stop. He checked his watch while he waited for the bus that came a full 5 minutes late. Ben hated being at the mercy of another's schedule, but he knew he could do nothing about it. Once the bus came to a stop, Ben climbed on board and paid the fare before he sought an empty seat. Given his girth, single seats seemed too small for him. Ben kept moving until he saw 2 open seats next to one another. Ben rested himself in one seat and found himself spilling over into the other. He fretted to himself, "Everyone's going to hate me." As more people came on board, Ben noticed their uniform silence. Most did not acknowledge one another. There was a degree of anonymity to each of them, even though many undoubtedly saw each other each day. Ben got off at a transfer station and got on the bus that would take him towards his office. He jostled his way through the bus and found open seats, but this time someone sat beside him. He could see the man was displeased by his body's invasion of the man's personal space, but neither of them could do much about it, other than moving. Ben stared out the window and let his mind drift as his stop grew nearer. He let out a sigh of relief as the man left him for his stop. It was not long after the man exited that Ben smelt a foul odor. That fuck must have ripped one, Ben thought before he saw the peeved looks from other riders being shot his way. Ben felt mortified, realizing that the people assumed that he had been the flatulent one. Ben sunk in his seat while he thought about what he would do in their shoes. He likely would have blamed the fat girl as well. She would be too obvious a candidate to pass over. The sight of his stop made Ben feel a sense of relief. He could not wait to get away from his fellow bus riders, even though their glares had returned to indifference. Ben struggled to keep his balance in his high-heel-adorned feet while he moved towards the door as the bus was coming to a stop. Ben clutched his purse as he made his way off the bus. Ben was relieved that the weather had warmed slightly by the time he made the 7-block walk from the bus stop to his city office building. Ben hesitated before he walked towards the office building's lobby. He was nervous about being recognized, but the building security addressed him like every other stranger. He signed in under his fake name and waited for the security guard to call upstairs to clear his entry. Once it was done, Ben was allowed to proceed to the elevators with his temporary pass. Ben waited for the elevator beside several familiar faces from the building that showed no hint at recognizing him. Ben was elated that his disguise was working, but he knew that people that better knew him would be next to him soon enough. Ben's heart raced as the elevator brought him closer to his office. With each stop, Ben felt the moment growing closer. He wondered what everyone would say when he was introduced as Melissa Luffman. He only hoped their loyalty was as strong as Drew, and he believed it to be. Exiting the elevator on his floor, Ben strolled towards his office door. He slowed down while he reached for the door to his office suite. Ben walked into his office with tentative steps. He saw his familiar receptionist give him a smile as she asked, "Can I help you?" Yes," Ben replied in his practiced tone. "What can I do for you?" Nadine asked. Ben was unsure how to answer the smiling girl. He forced a smile to his face as he answered, "I was just hired by Drew and Natalie." "Oh, you're the new girl that's starting today?" Nadine asked with her characteristic bubbly tone that Ben always felt was a great trait in a receptionist. "I'm Nadine," the girl continued. "Melissa," Ben replied as he shook the girl's outstretched hand before Nadine said, "Let me show you around. I'll introduce you to Erica. She's our office manager. She's going to be your direct boss." Ben's mind swirled as he processed Nadine's fast-paced talking and what she was conveying to him. She had not seen through his disguise and thought that he was a secretary going to work under the authority of the office manager he had hand-selected. Ben walked behind Nadine in a bit of a daze. She pouted as she saw that Erica was not yet in that morning. "Sorry, I thought I heard her come in," Nadine said. "No big deal," Ben replied. "Why don't you just take a seat and wait for her? Maybe I'll go and say hello to Drew and—" "Oh, here she is now," Nadine replied. "Erica, come on over. I want you to meet Melissa." "Melissa, it's very nice to meet you," Erica said while she shook his hand. "You too," Ben responded, amazed that a second employee had failed to recognize him. "Usually I meet the new applicants before they're hired," Erica replied. Ben could tell that she was peeved to be left out of the hiring process before she added, "But they gave me your resume, and it's exactly what I would have been looking for. They told me that you know this industry better than anyone." "I like to think so," Ben responded with a smile before Erica told him to step into her office. Erica sat at her desk, while Ben took a seat across the desk from her. Ben could not believe that she did not recognize him and was treating him like any other new hire. Erica handed Ben his company identification card to enter the building and suite before she started to tell him about the manuals and their computer system. Ben tried his best to pretend to be interested in what she was saying, but he had a hand in setting up the systems he had long ago mastered. Before Erica could continue on any longer, Drew knocked on the door. "Hey, Erica. I just wanted to come by and say hello to the new girl." "Hi, Drew," Ben forced himself to reply. He wanted to kiss her. It had only been a day, but given his new dynamic he had missed her immensely. She gave him a smile before she said, "Erica, I just want to take Melissa off your hands for a moment. Natalie and I have something to discuss with her." "Oh, sure. Of course," Erica replied, being in no position to argue with her boss. Erica felt relieved while Ben walked away with Drew. She feared that she would have said something she should not about the absence of Ben Cunningham to the new girl. Ben gave his wife a smile she reciprocated before they walked into Natalie's office. Natalie gave Ben a smile as Drew entered the office with him in tow. Drew closed the door while Ben sat in front of Natalie's desk before Drew joined him. Ben leaned onto his sister's desk and asked, "Why do they think I'm a secretary?" "I think you're missing the bigger picture." "They don't see anything amiss," Drew answered. "I'm glad you think that's great, but..." "Melissa, it's wonderful. If they can't tell, who can?" Natalie asked as Drew nodded with a smile. "I can't work like this." "What did you think you were going to do? We couldn't bring you in as a boss." "But I'm not a secretary." "It's what you have to be." "So, everyone's going to treat me like a secretary?" "Well, not quite," Drew said as she looked at Natalie. Ben's eyes veered from his wife to his sister before he asked, "What's going on?" "We're going to have to tell them the truth." "What truth?" "Who Melissa Luffman is." "You can't do that." "Melissa, please keep your voice down. We need to get ahead of this. What was the whole point of this? Why am I living like this by myself if we're..." "They won't talk." "Maybe I can go with that, but..." "We have to tell them." "They can't tell." "They'll figure it out," Drew replied. "How can you be so sure?" "You don't think you'll slip up," Natalie explained for his wife. Ben gave her a curious look before Drew noted, "You'll say something that only my lover would know. You'll not quite sit like a normal girl, or you'll do something else that reminds them of, you know." "You can't fool them forever," Natalie added. "So, this is a waste?" Ben asked as he pointed at the heavy prosthetic breasts that were altering his sense of balance. Drew and Natalie shook their heads before Drew replied, "Strangers won't know better." "They do. You can't hide yourselves from them. How do you know we can trust them? We've all worked with them for years. Would you have kept on anyone you didn't trust?" "We wouldn't. This is different. They might be bribed. As far as everyone knows, you're our new secretary. We brought you in to fill a need. We interviewed you because Ben has taken a leave of absence. That's the official story. Nobody's going to get any information from our staff. All they have to say is that Ben..." Drew and Natalie never said anything about where he went, which will be the truth. "He's gone, that's all they know, and all they have to say they know." Ben nodded before he asked, "Did you know that you were going to do this before you had me do this?" Drew's eyes darted to Natalie. Natalie shifted in her chair as she put one hand over her knee as she said, "I always thought it would be necessary." "Why didn't you tell me? Do you know how embarrassing this is going to?" "It's better than the alternative," Drew replied. "Maybe to you," Ben countered. "Don't be melodramatic," Drew chided. "You're not the one who is humiliating him. Herself." "You can't call yourself that here," his wife corrected him with haste. "Would you stop doing that?" "Melissa, I would love to, and I will when the time comes, but, for now, we have to keep up appearances. We can't have anyone thinking that you think you're my lover." "Fine," Ben relented. "Should we tell everyone, now?" Drew asked. Natalie nodded while she got to her feet. Ben groused as he and Drew followed her out the door of her office. Ben squirmed while he watched his wife and sister call for everyone's attention. The staff gathered in the center of the office as Drew said, "As you all know by now, my husband is being pursued by people who would do him harm. Now, none of you would ever endanger him. We've worked with you all for a long time, and we trust you with our lives. That's why I am going to let you in on a secret, and if you can all swear to keep your silence." Drew asked individual employee if they could maintain their confidence. No one was willing to say no to her. Drew felt satisfied with the confident answers from her trusted staff. She turned to Natalie and saw her give a nod to proceed. Drew steadied herself while she made the announcement, "Our lovely new assistant is my true love." Drew paused as she saw Ben glare at her before she added, "And someday again, she will be known by a different name, but for now, please only refer to her as Melissa Luffman." "We can't afford any slip-ups." The staff gave Drew confused looks before they looked over Ben. While they initially saw little resemblance, with discerning eyes they realized that he was not standing like a woman. The new assistant was standing like Ben. Stifled laughter started to fill the room while some people began to whisper the connection that most were missing. Drew grinned at them. Drew said with a smile while she stifled her laughter, "Now, let's all be professional about this." "Is she really our new assistant?" Krista asked after collecting herself. Drew nodded as she said, "Officially, yes. Melissa will be working at the open desk with our administrative staff. We obviously can't have her working in Ben's old office. It might give off the wrong idea about her relationship with me to any outsiders. So, if I need copies made." Sasha started to inquire with a laugh as Ben squirmed at the thought of making copies for his one-time protege. "You can use Melissa, particularly if we have guests. We want to make sure that all outsiders see her as an assistant, but bear in mind, she is loved by me and will be your boss one day. I trust her with everything, and she will be consulted for all of our business decisions." "In other words, keep it polite and tasteful," Natalie added. Drew nodded in reply before she noted, "I couldn't have said it better." "Are there any questions?" Natalie asked. The looks on the staff's faces made clear to Ben that they had many questions, but they were being respectful given his real identity and the positions of power still maintained by his wife and sister. Sasha broke the silence again by asking, "Is she Irish?" The comment made Ben and the girls laugh. Ben shook his head with a laugh while Drew answered for him, "That's our official position, yes." One of the saleswomen scrunched her face before she said, "Will she be using the ladies' room?" "Of course." "Would you have a problem if I used it?" Drew replied with a nod to Anna. "Remember to keep the seat down, ladies," Megan joked. Ben blushed at the comment from the personal secretary that had served his family since they founded the company. Ben shook his head before he said, "It won't be a problem. Trust me." "Oh, now, I have to ask, why do I have to trust you on this?" Megan inquired. Ben squirmed before Natalie glanced over at Drew. Drew nodded before she whispered to her secretary, "It's part of the cover, but Melissa is for all intents and purposes anatomically correct." "What?" Megan shouted as some of the girls laughed at the answer to the question they were left to assume, while others were confused. Drew explained, "She would pass a passing inspection. Not a physical or physical contact," Natalie added. "So, this isn't like surgery?" Megan inquired with concern. "No. God, no," Drew replied while Ben nodded with swift movements. Ben could see that the girls were relieved for him before Sasha asked, "Is Melissa going to introduce herself?" "I think that would be appropriate," Drew answered. Ben forced himself to smile as he said, "Hi, as you know, I'm Melissa Loveman. I hope to be a good addition to the team, and if you need any help, please let me know." "Short and sweet," Drew said. "Just like her," Megan joked. "Her legs are elongated," Sasha countered. "Okay, girls, get back to work," Natalie said with a laugh before Erica took Ben over to the computer that she had set up for him. Ben gave her an inquisitive look while he saw the new username he had. The name matched his fake identity. He felt that it was a safety measure that his sister and wife were pushing. Ben logged in and created a password for himself. He saw that a number of his emails had been forwarded to him. Ben smiled while he began to draft responses, but he realized that he could not send them with Melissa Loveman, administrative assistant, as his signature block. Instead, Ben sent the responses to his wife and sister for them to send out. Ben felt emasculated by having to give up his power to respond for himself. Ben continued to work, while the secretaries around him tried to bring him into their conversations. Ben tried his best to keep up, but he found that the conversations were of little interest to him. Ben exchanged a few compliments with the girls about various things they were wearing and how they styled themselves. Ben felt it was common courtesy, missing that the girls were finding his words amusing since they never would have passed through Ben Cunningham's lips. Despite it, Ben managed to do most of his normal work throughout the morning while the IT department worked around the office. A little before 11 a.m. his wife and sister called him into Drew's office. Ben pushed his chair out from beneath his Formica desk. The girls seated beside him laughed amongst themselves as they watched Ben strolling confidently in heels towards his wife's office with an unconscious sway to his hips. Megan shook her head while she said, "I never knew she was into this sort of thing." "I never would have guessed it either," Susanna added as the girls were amazed by how easily Ben took to his feminine guise. "I think this was all a setup," Megan noted with a shake of her head. "It's a little too involved for our little Melissa to have done all this deliberately," Erica countered. "I'm telling you," Megan noted while Ben strolled into Drew's office and closed the door behind him. "Melissa, we need you in there to help us make an informed proposal," Drew explained. Ben nodded. He always sat in the meetings and was unsurprised by her logic. It certainly made sense. Still, he hated having to present himself as a woman to new clients. Ben forced himself to his feet while he let his wife and sister go into the meeting to get it started like normal. Ben gave Megan a nervous look as she got up with a pad of paper in her hand and started towards the conference room with him. "Megan, you have no idea how humiliating this is," Ben confided. Megan smiled as she said, "You could have come out looking a lot worse. If I didn't know you, I never would have guessed it in a million years. That only makes it worse. This feels so weird." "Well, not every girl jumps up to a D cup in a week," Megan whispered. Ben shook his head before he said, "It's really not that funny. It's a matter of perspective. It's like Mel Brooks said, tragedy is what happens to me, comedy is what happens to you. I'm glad you find it funny. I think Drew does too." "More so Natalie," Ben confided. "Your partner finds it funny," Megan responded. "I know," Ben said with a shake of his head as he came to a stop, surprised by Megan's choice of words for his wife. "What's wrong?" Ben squirmed while he looked down at his clothing and heels. He shook his head as he asked, "Do you think this is an appropriate outfit for a meeting like this?" "I'm supposed to be a boss." Megan paused. She thought to herself, "You're not the boss anymore, babe." She tried to give Ben a comforting look as she replied, "I think you look just perfect for the part." Ben found the statement of little comfort before Megan added, "Let me go and make sure that they're all set in there. Why don't you get everyone a cup of coffee and collect yourself?" "Okay. That's a good idea," Ben replied while he parted ways with Megan. Ben walked into the kitchen and grabbed a few cups and the pot of coffee that Megan had made for the meeting. Ben took a few deep breaths as he assembled the pot and cups on the serving tray they kept for occasions such as this. Ben paused to check his reflection in the mirror that was above a table in the company's kitchen. He gave himself a nod as he felt that he was composed enough to handle the meeting. Ben picked up the tray and steadied it while he walked from the kitchen to the conference room. As he entered the room, he situated the tray on the table. "I'd like you all to meet Melissa, she's my personal secretary," Natalie said as Ben looked around the room of business people, trying to suppress his shock. He saw Megan sitting off to the side of the table with a pad and pen. A pad and pen were left on the seat beside her. Ben had no doubt that they were left for him. "I'm really a secretary," Ben thought. The realization was horrifying and humbling to him. He did not have long to linger on the thought as Drew asked who wanted coffee. Ben made a mental note of each before he began to pour the coffee into the cups before him. He passed around the milk, cream and sugar while he thought, "I should have listened to Dad." His father's constant advice to keep his mouth shut seemed sage-like as Ben considered his situation. Ben saw Megan giving him a sympathetic smile as he smoothed out the skirt of his dress while he sat down to join her. Ben mimicked her body posture by crossing his nylon-covered legs at the ankle and placing the pad on his lap. His mind raced as he struggled with his disbelief that he was going to be doing the same task as his longtime assistant. As the businessman started to talk terms with his wife and sister, Ben began to take notes. Ben swallowed hard when he saw the men sneaking looks at him. He wondered if they realized that he was really a man. The more he caught their wandering eyes, the more he realized that they were not looking at his face, but his breasts. Ben struggled not to blush at the casual ogling the men were doing to him while they negotiated with his wife and sister at the table. The girls made no comment about what the men were doing, even though Ben was certain that they were aware that the older men were leering at him. Ben's hands continued to jot down notes, even as his stomach churned while his mind contemplated the potential fantasies that the men were having about him. He knew what crossed his mind when he saw a woman he found attractive. They probably want to motorboat me, Ben feared as he tried in vain to focus on the discussions the men were having with his wife and sister. "Can I get a refill?" one of the men asked while he motioned for Natalie to pass the coffee pot. Natalie turned over her shoulder and ordered, "Melissa, top Mr. Gaultier off." The order made Ben feel lowly. He knew that he could not utter the insult he wanted to shoot back at his sister. He wanted to protest that he was every bit the boss that she was, but he knew that it would destroy his cover. Ben swallowed his pride while he stood up before his wife, sister and secretary and replied, "Yes, Natalie." Ben bent over the table to clasp the coffee pot and saw Mr. Gaultier's eyes staring at his breasts that were now at his eye level. Ben resisted the urge to call attention to it while he clasped the pot's handle with his right hand and carried it around the conference table with his left hand held out to the side in an unconsciously feminine manner. While every part of him wanted to pour the hot coffee directly into the lecherous man's lap, Ben filled Mr. Gaultier's cup while the businessman continued to talk business with his wife and sister. Mr. Gaultier gave Ben a smile as he thanked him before Ben walked away. Ben could feel Mr. Gaultier's eyes following his swaying rear before he sat back down and crossed his legs again. Ben began taking notes again on his lap. Ben wanted to ask the businessman questions that his wife and sister were not asking, but he knew that it would be inappropriate. He sat in silence while they continued talking before the meeting came to an end with his sister informing the two men that they would get a proposal out to them that day. The businessman thanked the girls for their time before they came over and shook Ben and Megan's hands as well. Ben forced himself to smile while he lied that it was a pleasure to meet the pair. Once the businessmen were out of the office, Megan handed her notes to Ben and started to clean up the conference room. Ben followed Natalie and Drew out of the conference room and into Drew's office. Drew sat behind her desk, while Natalie took a seat before it and asked Ben to read back the terms that were discussed. Ben shook his head as he countered, "You were there. You know what was discussed." "That's right. I was the one discussing it. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything," Natalie rejoined. Ben nodded, understanding her point. It was the same reason that he brought Megan into each meeting he had. Ben stood before the two women and read back his notes before Natalie asked, "And what did Megan write?" "Are my notes not good enough for you?" Ben inquired, not disguising his displeasure as he shifted his feet in his heels. "It's always better to have confirmation," Natalie retorted while she crossed her eyes and glared at her feminized brother. Ben wanted to lash out at her for treating him like he was Megan's equal, but he knew that it would be pointless. He tilted his head down and read Megan's notes that largely mirrored his, except for the portion he missed while he was pouring Mr. Gaultier's cup of coffee. "You didn't go back and fill in what you heard," Drew chided. "Megan was there too," Ben retorted. "She may not always be," Drew rejoined. "I'll try better next time, if there is a next time," Ben responded while he dropped the pad to his waist. "Melissa, we expect a better attitude from you," Natalie interjected. "How chipper do you think I can be under the... Look, you're new here, and we need to know if you can fit in here. If you can't, we're going to have to let you go," Drew rejoined, cutting off Ben's attempt to defend himself. Ben's stomach sunk as he thought about what a waste his feminization would be if he was no longer able to come to work. He understood why they could not afford to let him be a distraction. Business needed to go on ahead without issue. Everyone's livelihood in the office depended on it. "I'm sorry," Ben forced himself to reply, understanding the position that everyone was in because of his actions. "Okay. Now, that that's done with, what do you think we should do?" Drew asked. Ben cleared his throat before he began to respond, "I was asking my business partner," Drew advised, stopping Ben's response. Ben's cheeks went flush as he struggled to put the slight aside. Natalie gave his silence a nod before she gave her position and reasoning. Ben agreed with every word of it and said, "That makes sense." The two girls gave him a curious look before Drew said, "Okay. Go type up the proposal, Melissa." Ben was struck by his wife's order. He could not take it anymore as he said, "I'm not really a secretary. I can do so much. Melissa, we hired you to be a secretary. Your job is to make our jobs easier, Drew corrected her husband. That's not what I agreed to. It is. You were the one that wanted to work here. We're giving you this opportunity that, frankly, I didn't want to give you, Drew reminded her husband. But I can do more. Melissa, in time, we may be able to give you more responsibilities, but we need to know your capabilities before we can do that. You know what I'm capable of. It's your first day here. We're still trying to feel you out, Natalie countered as she wrote the words hidden microphones on a notepad. Ben sucked his lips into his mouth as he processed their claim and began to understand their choices of words that he had been observing throughout the day. It made sense to him. They were talking about him as a new girl because that was what everyone was advised to refer to him as for his own safety. Even his reveal only noted that he was Drew's lover. The lesbian lover she had advised she might need to out herself as having the night of his feminization. I'm sorry, Ben forced himself to apologize again to the girls. It's okay, Melissa. You're getting your bearings here. We don't expect perfection on day one, Drew replied. Ben thanked her before Drew held up her coffee cup and asked, Melissa, please get me a cup of coffee. Ben's jaw dropped while he processed his wife's request. A smile came to her face as her eyes fixated on the glare on her husband's feminized face while she noted, it's part of your job description. Ben wanted to scream as he threw his arms to his sides. He took a deep breath while he stared at the ceiling. Once he began to calm down, Ben said, of course, Drew. I'll be happy to. Thanks, doll, Drew joked while she handed him her cup. Ben then asked, how would you like it? Drew gave him a peeved look. Ben was certain she was upset that after years of marriage, he was unsure how she preferred her coffee, despite having been out to countless places where she ordered cups in his presence before. Drew crossed her arms as she answered, a little milk and 1 sugar packet. Got it, Ben replied before he turned on his heels. He walked out of the office and put the pads of paper down on his desktop before he continued through the office on his way to the kitchenette. Ben reached for the coffee machine and poured the dark liquid into his wife's cup before he added the milk and sugar. As he made the cup, he saw one of his employees come to a stop in the doorway. Ben could sense the unease on Krista's face. She was an employee he worked closely with as Ben Cunningham. He always felt that she had something of a crush on him, but they both knew that it would never work out due to his wife's presence in the office. Ben greeted her warmly, as he always did. The attractive young girl nodded, barely able to meet his gaze while she responded, Hi, Melissa, what's going on? Just getting a cup of coffee for the boss, Ben responded in truth, fearing that their conversation would be overheard by the clandestine efforts of the criminal syndicate out for his blood. The girl walked around him before Ben told her he would talk to her later. They both knew it was a lie, but Ben was happy enough to avoid any awkward conversations with the girl he had taken so much time to help teach since he hired her. Ben hurried through the suite with his skirt-constricted gait before he knocked on Drew's door. Drew smiled while she motioned for Ben to enter her office as she talked on the phone. Ben put the cup of coffee down before she thanked him and sent him on his way out the door. Ben kept his head down while he made his way over to his new desk. As Ben pulled himself under his small desk, he went to log onto the firm's proprietary drive. Ben's eyes widened when he saw the prompt informing him that his account did not have the privileges required to access the drive. You've got to be kidding me, Ben muttered while he got to his feet. Ben stormed into his wife's office and said, Why can't I access the Z drive? Drew gave him a curious look before she said, Melissa, that drive is only for the executives. Ben gave his wife a glare as he whispered in a fierce tone, Can we cut the bullshit for 1 minute? Melissa, we can't let you have administrative rights. If we do it for you, every admin is going to want it. Well, I'm Natalie's assistant, Ben forced himself to reply. You're everyone's assistant. Megan is still handling me and Natalie. But Natalie introduced me. Natalie was just saying that so no one would ask why we had 2 separate assistants sitting in for the meeting, Drew explained. Ben mumbled to himself before Drew added, This is all for appearances. I get it, Ben half lied. He understood their reasoning even as he felt it was overly cautious. That was his wife's way though. She never wanted to leave anything to chance. Ben gave his wife a defeated look that made her stomach flutter a little while he got to his feet and started back towards his desk. Before he could exit her office, Drew ordered, "Hold up." Ben froze in place and pivoted on his heels. His eyes focused on his wife while she approached him with a stack of papers. Drew smiled as she handed Ben the stack of papers and reminded him, "Melissa, we have a big meeting of our board of directors. Now, we have everything handled, but they're obviously concerned about Ben's departure. We need to put them all at ease and make sure they realize that we're taking care of everything." "Got it," Ben replied. "Good, now, I'm going to need you to make copies for each of the board members. There's 5 of them, plus me and Drew. So, we need 7 sets. Okay?" "Got it," Ben responded again, feeling that her question at the end was insulting to his intelligence. "When do you need it by?" "By the end of the workday, but we need you to draft the proposal first." "That's your priority." "Understood," Ben responded while he took hold of the papers from his wife's hands. He brought them back over to his desk before he sat back and began to work on the proposal. Ben drafted the proposal from his notes before he proofread it and made a few corrections. Once he finished, he printed out 2 copies for his wife and sister to review. They each thanked him before he returned to his desk to retrieve the stack of papers for the next day's meeting. Ben saw eyes upon him as he walked towards the copier with the papers in hand. Ben paid them no mind, knowing he needed to keep up appearances and that his feminized state was going to be an ongoing curiosity in the office. He fed the papers into the machine. He tapped his painted nails on the top of the machine while the copier churned out the documents. Ben collected the copies and sorted them for each board member before he carried the documents into Drew's office. Drew thanked him while she looked at the various documents before she dismissed him from her office. Walking back to his desk, Ben put his head down out of reflex due to how humbled he felt. He could not believe how low he had sunk. He came to a stop as he saw the 2 copies of his draft proposal on his desktop. A cursory flip of the pages confirmed that his wife and sister had both left edits to his work. Ben struggled to keep his composure as he realized that the 2 girls had made more changes to his work than they had ever been willing to do before. He gritted his teeth while he thought, "They're really testing my patience." Still, Ben realized that the danger was too great to risk exposure though. He forced himself to make his wife's changes first before he looked at his sister's comments. Ben furrowed his brow at his realization that some of her modifications conflicted with Drew's. Ben got to his feet with a sigh. He felt his pumps digging into his heels and nylon-covered toes during his walk to his sister's office. Ben knocked on her door before Natalie asked, "What can I do for you?" "I was looking at your markup." "Okay. It doesn't jive with Drew's." "How so?" "Well, look here," Ben answered while he gave his sister both markups. Natalie read over all of Drew's changes before she said, "There's a lot of red here." "Yeah, tell me about it," Ben countered. "I think it was a good first draft for a first-timer," Natalie noted. "Thanks," Ben said through gritted teeth, since they both knew that it was hardly the first time he had drafted a proposal for the company. Natalie then told Ben what changes she agreed with and what modifications she still recommended. Ben forced himself to thank her before he went to see his wife. Drew listened to Ben's explanation of his conversation with Natalie. Drew looked over the proposed changes and said, "I agree with all of them, but one." "Which?" Ben asked. "Hold up," Drew responded before she called Natalie's phone line. Ben listened and shifted his increasingly pained feet around while they discussed the single point of the proposal where they disagreed. Once they reached an accord, Drew made the modifications and sent Ben back to his desk to revise the document. Ben sat at the desk and made the modifications before he sent the document to his wife and sister for final approval. Once he received it, Ben printed the document and gave it to his wife to sign. As her signature dried, Drew dismissed Ben to send out the letter. Ben felt more than emasculated by the perfunctory nature of his wife's order. There was not even the seeming thought in her mind that he might resist an order. Ben cursed under his breath that she was right before he scanned in a copy for his wife to send to the businessmen. He then prepared the physical mailing and put it in the outgoing mail pile. After Ben returned to his desk, he made small talk with the other secretaries while he did some data input for his wife. As he worked, he loosened up more and spoke more freely with the other girls. Ben enjoyed hearing them laugh and felt at ease amongst them. His discussions were broken up when he started receiving tasks from his wife and sister. Ben rolled his eyes at the requested work. He knew they were really orders, which made him all the more peeved by them. Working as a secretary as part of his life arc had never crossed Ben's mind. It seemed too far-fetched to be true, but he was sitting amongst all his other administrative staff, dressed like one of them. Ben tried to focus on the tasks the girls were giving him before lunchtime came. Ben went down to the eatery on the ground floor of the building before he brought the meal back up to his desk. He ate at his desk while he caught up on more work that Drew and Natalie were sending. Ben shook his head as he thought, they're playing this up too much. As the phone rang, Ben reached for it and answered with the company's standard greeting. Ben froze when he was requested to direct the call. It was not something he was used to doing. He was used to people calling him on his line. Ben put the call on hold before he asked the other girls how to transfer a call. One of the senior administrative assistants got to her feet and helped Ben transfer the call to his sister. The girls laughed at Ben's unfamiliarity with the company's technology once the issue was over. Ben struggled not to blush, slightly humiliated by having to ask for instruction about such a simple task. The rest of his workday was broken up only by occasional small talk with the girls and when Drew and Natalie needed to talk with him about an issue with the company. Ben did his best not to snap at them. He wanted to shout that they were not above treating him like an equal when they needed his advice, but were trying to force him into the apparent role of a secretary when they did not need him. Ben was dejected when he left the office building to walk to the bus stop that evening. He found himself tired and wanting to tear off his heels while he rode the bus before he transferred to another stop. As Ben walked from the stop to his apartment building, he feared how many more days he would have as Melissa. There was no clear end in sight to his time in heels, skirts and hose. This could be forever, Ben said under his breath while he gazed down at his large chest. He tried to force that thought away with positive thoughts, but they struck him as fantasy. The fear that this may be his life stayed with him while he unlocked the front door and started up the stairs. Ben went into his apartment and immediately removed his heels while he closed the door behind him. He threw them across the room and paid no attention to their thud on the floor. Ben dropped his padded butt onto the couch and clasped his head while he thought with tears in his eyes, Melissa Luffman forever or death. While he found Melissa's life not without its merit, the idea that he was her to stay was almost too much for him. Ben shook his head while he thought, I should have just kept my mouth shut, Dad. The next morning, Ben strolled out of his apartment building clad in a plaid-patterned, high-low flounce-hemmed, mermaid-silhouetted skirt, a ruffle front, flared long-sleeved, lattice-cut bluish-gray blouse and a double-breasted, black and white plaid coat. He struggled to put his humiliation over his enjoyment of the feeling of the black, opaque tights ascending his legs that morning out of his head. It was mortifying to him on too many levels to be enjoying parts of his feminine disguise. He felt that it was indefensible, given his masculinity, but it was becoming undeniable. His best efforts to justify it away always led to the same conclusion that he must be less of a man than he thought he was. Ben clutched his arms while he shivered at the bus stop. His black suede, pointed toe, stiletto-heeled feet turned inward towards one another as he waited. As the bus pulled up, he saw his reflection in the window in the door. He looked every inch the image of the shivering women he had seen on so many cold mornings on the city streets. Ben ran his card through the fare reader and took an empty seat. He crossed his legs at the ankles and drew them under the seat. After he made the same transfer he normally made, he got off the bus at the stop and walked towards the building. He flashed the building's security guard the company ID card he was given the day before to allow him to bypass the check-in line. He walked towards the elevator and saw familiar faces from other companies waiting for the doors to open. Several of them had engaged Ben Cunningham over the years. Now, Ben felt relieved that they all looked through him as Melissa Luffman, as just another anonymous, middle-aged secretary in the building. Ben forced himself onto the elevator with the others. He was all too aware that he, now, took up more room than most. He had been judgmental about the men and women that he felt were invading his space with their large circumferences. His harshest judgment, however, had been reserved for women like the distorted one he saw looking back at him in the reflection on the metal doors of the elevator. Ben waddled out of the elevator while he excused himself to pass behind a young, thin girl. She was the very type of girl that Ben Cunningham had no problem trying to seduce weeks before, despite the happy marriage he felt he had. As he entered the office, Ben greeted the receptionist warmly. Nadine gave him a happy smile and greeting before Ben went to his desk. Ben said hello to his fellow administrative assistants as they each entered the office and situated themselves in the centrally located desks. Just as he did, Ben crossed his legs and began to work on the things that Drew and Natalie had emailed him to address. While he worked, Ben overheard the girls' conversations around him. Ben bit his tongue at first, but Megan kept trying to engage him. Her efforts encouraged the other girls to try to loosen Ben's tongue. Ben's resistance wore down by the late morning as his wife and sister had still not entered the office due to various meetings. Ben had always enjoyed talking with the girls before, but he was always above them. They were girls that he would never touch because of the high probability that things would go quickly wrong for him, his business and his reputation. As the conversation turned to talking about their partners, Ben could not help but to chime in. The girls laughed at his complaints about Drew, which he disguised by awkwardly avoiding gender pronouns. Drew overheard one of his comments when she entered the office. She shot Ben a glare for a criticism about her unwillingness to be adventurous in the bedroom. She shook her head while she put aside the retort she wanted to shout, but felt would be more inappropriate than Ben and the girls' salon-style conversation. "Melissa, can I speak to you?" Drew asked. "Sure, Drew," Ben answered while he got to his feet and followed his wife into her office. Ben listened as his wife asked him to clean up the conference room for the board of directors meeting and lay out one set of the copies he made the day before in front of each chair at the table. It was a simple enough order, but Ben was unhappy about being tasked with cleaning up the conference room. He felt that it was something for one of the girls who truly was an administrative assistant to handle. With that thought in mind, Ben asked, "Are you sure that's the best use of my time?" Drew's head jerked from her computer screen to stare into Ben's eyes. She glared at him while she replied, "Yes, I'm sure. That's why I asked you to do it. You're the new girl here. The other girls all have work to do too. In fact, they probably all have more work to do because the staff trusts them to get it done." Ben felt browbeaten by his wife's stern words. He nodded as he said, "Okay. I'll get on it." "Thanks, and get me a cup of coffee," Drew replied, still peeved about his comments to the girls. "Sure," Ben said, feeling rejected by his wife while he took hold of her coffee cup. He hurried through the office in his skirt-constricted steps. He ignored the eyes of the junior executives that were avoiding looking at him, due to how uncomfortable they were with having to treat him as one of the secretaries. Ben knew that his wife's words were true. The other girls had to work for the rest of the staff, while he and Megan only had to make sure that his sister and Drew's needs were met. He made the cup of coffee for Drew and brought it back towards her office. He paused before he knocked on her door. "Yes," Drew replied in a curt tone. "Just bringing you your coffee," Ben replied. "Thanks," Drew perfunctorily responded. Ben walked beside her desk and collected the documents he had left the day before. He excused himself in a low voice that his wife found mousy. After Ben brought the documents into the conference room, he went to the kitchenette to retrieve the glass cleaner and paper towels. He saw the confused look of one of his young protégés as she saw him emerge with the cleaning supplies in hand. Ben averted his eyes from Anna's as he wondered if anyone in the office would ever be able to think of him the same once he could return to his male life. Ben tried to focus on his task at hand as he sprayed the cleaner onto the tabletop instead of the answer he sensed was obvious. Ben leaned across the table and pressed the paper towels down hard on the glass. He felt the dampness forming beneath his palm while he worked. The realization that his stomach and breasts were resting on part of the table whenever he leaned across it to clean the middle was not lost on him. He checked himself to ensure that his top was dry and presentable before he repeated the action several times while he made his way down the long table. Once the tabletop was dry, Ben set up one set of the copies at each chair that his board members sat at before he hurried out of the room, feeling as if he no longer had a place at the table he had sat at the head of since they moved into the office space. Ben then put away the cleaning supplies and returned to his desk. As Ben sat down and began to work beside the girls again, he joined their conversations as best he could. He tried to make the best of things and felt that his chatting with the girls was making the day go by faster. He went down for lunch with Susanna, one of the senior assistants in the office. They chatted and praised each other's outfits. Susanna still found it funny to hear the words passing through Ben's feminized lips, while Ben found it perplexing that he was falling so easily into the habits that the other secretaries had long demonstrated. This must be what Stockholm Syndrome is, Ben rationalized while he gushed over Susanna's designer bag. After lunch, Ben watched as Drew and Natalie started towards the conference room for the board meeting. Ben was surprised that neither had consulted him before the meeting. He knew that the meeting was called to discuss the company's profitability and the issues resulting from Ben's disappearance. He hoped that the girls knew how to handle the situation without him, but he harbored his doubts. After 10 minutes had passed, Ben heard his phone ringing. Ben lifted it and answered the call from the conference room. Ben sat up straight when he heard his sister tell him, "Melissa, please come into the conference room." "Yes, of course, Natalie," Ben replied after a pause. He hurried to his feet and felt sick to his stomach. As his thighs chafed against one another with each step, Ben wondered if he was about to be exposed to the board members as Ben Cunningham in drag. He struggled to put a smile on his face while he knocked on the conference room door and forced it open. Ben froze as the board members all turned their gaze on him, but he felt relieved as their eyes drifted away from him. He felt relieved that no one was taking an interest in him but his sister, who said, "Please bring us a pitcher of water, a pot of coffee and some cups." "Of course," Ben replied with a forced smile. He was too relieved to care that he was being ordered about by his sister in plain sight of the investors he had personally pitched to help grow his company. Ben filled up a pitcher and made a fresh pot of coffee. As the coffee brewed, Ben carried in the water pitcher and some cups and put them on a side table that was located on the far wall. He saw eyes dart towards him to look over his large rear and chest while he walked, but he had grown used to the subtle looks that men gave him. It was nothing like the leering that he had experienced the day before. It hardly made him uncomfortable as he experienced it again as he brought in the coffee pot and cups. With that, Ben was dismissed from the room. It was similar to what he had done with Megan countless times before. She came into the room to drop things off and was ordered to leave. There was no place for an administrative assistant in a place where the most important business terms of the company were discussed. It was difficult for Ben to not feel humbled by it. He was happy enough that Drew and Natalie were letting the investors make their own cups of coffee and pour their own glasses of water. It was something that Ben had been doing for years to show that he would not have his company kowed out to them. Ben tried to put his displeasure out of his mind while he situated himself beneath his desk. He worked his feet out of his heels and stretched them, feeling an instant relief while he did so. Ben went back to chatting with the girls while his wife and sister handled the investors in the conference room. By the time his sister and wife emerged from the conference room, the workday was nearing its end. "Melissa, I'm going to need you to stay late," Drew announced as she came to a stop at his desk. "Is everything okay?" Ben asked, feeling unsettled by the order. "Everything is fine. We just need to clean some stuff up." Ben nodded before he asked, "Is there anything I can do for you, now?" "Yes. Get me a cup of coffee and pick up my dry cleaning. It's going to be a long night." "Sure," Ben forced himself to reply to his wife, who looked a bit harried. She must have had a rough day, Ben thought while he slipped on his heels and retrieved Drew's coffee cup. He felt upset that he had not been there to lighten his wife's burden at the board meeting. He had always taken the initiative and handled all the difficult questions for his wife and sister. Now, he could not even pretend to have a place at the table due to his own actions. Ben carried the cup of coffee from the kitchenette back to his wife's office. With every step, Ben could not deny that, for as much as he hated his heels, he was enjoying the feeling of his skirt swishing over his tights. As he put the cup down on Drew's desk, Drew reached for her dry cleaning ticket and handed it to Ben. Ben smiled as he took it before she gave him her credit card to pay for it. "You're entrusting me with this?" Ben asked with a smile, trying to lighten his wife's mood. "I have to trust you. You're my secretary," Drew answered as a smile came to her face. Ben gave her a dutiful nod before he went to his desk. Ben put on his jacket and slipped the dry cleaning ticket and credit card into his purse before he started for the elevator. Ben exited the building and went to the neighboring dry cleaner that he and his staff often used. It was, however, not a place he had ever stepped foot in before. The place was slightly run down, but Ben figured that people only cared about the quality of the work. The Korean woman behind the counter gave him a smile while she took the dry cleaning ticket from him. "Oh, this is for Ms. Cunningham." "It's Mrs. Cunningham," Ben thought, slightly peeved by the mistake. Ben nodded before she added, "She usually sends Megan for this." "Well, she's busy, and I'm the new girl," Ben responded, utilizing his wife's explanation. "Well, it's very nice to meet you," the woman replied with her heavily accented voice while Ben gave her the credit card to pay for her company's services. Ben signed the receipt, forging his wife's signature, as Megan often did before he took hold of his wife's dry cleaning. He walked back toward the office building and saw that the building was emptying out quickly. He checked his watch and saw that it was already past 5. Ben made his way into the building, struggling to dodge the various people making their way home as he did so. Ben got on the elevator, once it finished emptying out. He rode it up alone and exited on his floor. He said goodnight to a few of his employees turned coworkers before he used his new company keycard to enter the office space. Ben found that there were few people left in the place. He hung up his wife's laundry in the closet by the front door before he settled back in at his desk and worked on the tasks that his wife had given him to handle that evening. The work consumed his mind after he slipped his feet out of his heels. He continued typing long after the last employee had left for the evening. As his wife emerged from her office, she asked, "Melissa, can I see you for a moment?" "Sure," Ben said. Ben bent down and situated his feet into his heels before he stood up. He walked into Drew's office with his chest forced out by the shoes and stood awaiting further orders. "Close and lock the door, Melissa." Ben gave his wife a confused look. Still, he followed his wife's direction. He then turned to face her as he heard her begin to blast music. Ben was bewildered by her actions while Drew came over to him and whispered, "Now, we can talk without the microphones picking up anything." "Okay," Ben said with a racing heart. "I'm getting lonely, Melissa," Drew noted. "I'm lonely too," Ben replied, sure that he was feeling her distress equally, if not more. "I'm a woman, Melissa. I have needs." "I know." "I'm sorry," Ben replied, feeling guilty about everything he had done to his wife and their life together. "With my husband gone, it's just hard. I can't just go out and find another guy to satisfy me," Drew said with a forlorn look. "I'm so sorry about that," Ben responded in truth. "I don't think relations with a woman would be cheating in my husband's book," Drew noted as a smile came across her face. Ben blushed before Drew continued while she began to stroke his hand. "He always pushed me for a three-way, but that was never my thing. He knew I'd never share him." "Right," Ben responded while he felt aroused by his wife's touch and ashamed by his repeated betrayals of the woman he had promised his life to at an altar before God. Ben felt that he had never been as desperate for a woman's touch as he was at the moment. He had never been as desperate as Drew was making herself sound when he was Ben either, but, still, he succumbed so easily to temptation for no reason at all, other than that it felt good at the moment. Drew sat down and hiked up her skirt to show that she was not wearing panties. Ben's eyes widened as he saw the vagina that he had penetrated on numerous occasions. "Melissa, I need you to go down on me," Drew ordered. Ben froze. He had never given oral sex to his wife or any other woman. He always felt that a man satisfied his woman with his manhood. It was a woman's job to satisfy a man with her tongue. Melissa, now. I need a release so bad, Drew ordered as her hands brushed her vaginal lips. Ben hesitated as he bent down to drop to his nylon-covered knees before his wife. His eyes stared vacantly at her sex before she clasped the sides of his head and ordered, "Bury that tongue." Ben affirmed to himself that he could do it. It doesn't make you less of a man, he thought before his mind countered, wearing the skirt and heels saw to that. Ben's stomach rumbled while his tongue lashed at Drew's pussy. Drew laughed at his fumbling effort as she told him how to change his technique. Ben followed her every order, sure that she knew her body better than he did. He wondered how she knew how she liked her oral sex, but he was certain that a prior boyfriend had likely been more willing than he was. Not every man was the type of real man that Ben Cunningham felt he was. That thought made Ben pause for a moment while he contemplated the absurdity of his self-perception at the moment. He was no longer a desirable man to women. He was a middle-aged, plump secretary. He was not even able to have real sex with his wife, but was reduced to providing her with the kind of sexual pleasure he felt was the stuff of last resort for lesser men. "Oh, you're so good with that tongue. Did you lick your bitch like that?" Drew asked with a moan. "What?" Ben asked while his tongue darted out of his wife. "You didn't think I knew?" Drew asked with a sneer. Ben shook his head as terror filled his eyes. "She wasn't the first. I hate you for it. Is that why you did this to me?" "What, saving you?" Ben fell silent as he processed her claim. "I may hate you for cheating, but I know that you won't do it now." "No. I promise I won't." "You don't need to promise. All you have to do is look in the mirror each morning in your shitty apartment and you'll know whose bitch you are now." Ben swallowed hard while he continued to gaze up at his wife as she continued, "All the staff thinks this was your idea." "What?" "Me and Natalie told them that you wanted to hide out as a secretary. They all questioned why would you do that, and we let them answer it themselves. They think I'm doing this for some sort of sexual kink." "Definitely. All the girls are sure that you're into this. They've been telling me." "Oh, God. You see, even if this ever dies down, there's no going back to the way that things used to be." "I'll never go for that," Drew explained. "This isn't." "Don't talk, just listen," Drew said while she squeezed Ben's head between her smooth thighs. "You always talk, now, it's my turn," Drew added. Ben mumbled into Drew's pussy before she continued with a smirk, "Keep licking me." Ben went back to trying to please his wife as she continued, "You don't know how good that feels. I needed this so badly. The stress I'm under, you can't even believe. You're so lucky that you're a secretary and don't have to carry these burdens around." For a moment, Ben felt lucky about it. He knew the burdens he had shouldered and was sorry that they had been transferred to his wife's out of necessity. He knew the level of help his sister could provide. It was significant, but she could not bear it alone. "Oh, my God. I can't believe you held this back from me for so long. You were born to be a pussy bitch," his wife screamed out. The words made Ben blush as he furiously lapped at her while she squeezed his cheeks tightly between her thighs to ensure that he would not pull out again. Drew reached her hands down and pushed Ben's face flush to her pussy. "You're so much better with your tongue. God, I hope you stay like this forever." Ben squealed into his wife while the fears that he had harbored rose up again. The more he lapped at her, the more certain he was that Ben Cunningham would never remerge. He knew his employees could never look at him the same way, and, now, he was certain that his wife would never either. Ben felt a sense of pleasure come over him as he heard his wife's loud screams and moans. He was pleased that he had satisfied her, which was something he demonstrated little regard to ensuring since their wedding night. Drew stroked Ben's hair before she relaxed her thighs and ordered through pants, "Go clean yourself up." Ben's eyes went downcast as he heard the order. It was the same one he gave his wife and other girls whenever he climaxed onto their faces. Now, it was being used on him. He felt that the reversal of his life was complete. Ben buried his chin into his ample breasts and started out of the office door after grabbing his purse. He struggled to keep his composure while he entered the bathroom and ensured that he was alone. He stood before the mirror and touched up the glue holding on his mask. His heart continued to race over the conversation he had just had with his wife and what he had done. Maybe I'm a better man this way, Ben fretted. He was certain that he was making a better husband for her as a woman, which only served to humiliate him further. Ben walked back into the office to apologize to his wife about his indiscretions. She put a finger to his lip as she pointed around them, reminding Ben that they were not free to talk about their relationship. Ben hung his head before he saw his wife turn off her light and say, "It's time to close up shop, Melissa." Ben nodded while he shut down his computer and put on his jacket. He walked out of the office, a few steps behind his wife, and waited for the elevator with her, each holding their pocketbooks in front of them. As they entered the elevator alone, Ben said, "I'm sorry about everything." "I know, but it's only because you were caught," Drew rejoined. "No. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then, why did you do it?" Drew demanded to know. "Because I was a cad." "I know. Fortunately, I don't think I need to worry about you straying anymore." "No. Never again." "Yes, I think that Serena made sure of that." "She did. I'll never be that man again after this." "Oh, I know," Drew said with an assured smile that made Ben's eyes dart away from her. Their conversation ceased while they exited into the lobby and saw the night security guard glance over at them. They each said good night to the man while their heels clicked in near unison on the lobby floor. The sound of the dueling clicks made Ben's stomach sink. He felt like nothing but a downscale woman in the presence of a superior woman he had once called his wife. "I'll see you tomorrow," Drew said as they exited the building, breaking the silence that accompanied Ben's despair. "See you tomorrow," Ben forced himself to reply in a low voice. Drew and Ben started down the sidewalk in different directions. Drew started for the parking garage across the street where her luxury German car was parked, while Ben went towards the bus stop. Ben then heard a sudden squeal from his wife as a stranger squeezed her cheeks. "Hey, what are you doing?" Ben demanded to know as he hurried towards the man as quickly as his heels and skirt would permit. "None of your business, lady," the man barked while Ben started towards him with his purse swaying about in his hands. "Get your hands off her," Ben demanded, feeling weak and unable to defend his wife with anything more than words. The man released Drew, realizing that Ben's loudness was drawing unwanted attention. Drew trembled while she looked at the dark-eyed man. Ben rushed to his wife's side as he looked over the thug. The thug smirked while he looked Ben over. "Maybe I was a bit harsh with you. You're more my type." Ben's skin crawled before the man added, "I like big, beautiful girls. They really know how to handle a man and not take him for granted." Ben felt revolted before the man brushed his cheek. Ben prayed that the glue holding on his mask would hold firm as the man inspected Ben's feminized face. "You're the new girl here, aren't you? Do you know who you work for?" the thug inquired. "No," Ben said through a stammer as the man's hand caressed his right side while he and his wife were powerless to stop him. "A dead man and his lovely wife." "He's not dead," Ben countered. "We'll see to it that he is," the thug rejoined while he tore his hand away from Ben to point at Drew as he added, "and we'd better not find out that you know where they're hiding him." "They don't tell me that," Drew countered. "And you let him leave alone?" the man inquired, unwilling to believe her. "He was cheating on me," Drew explained herself. The man laughed as he said, "So, you know about that? I got the company. He can go do whatever he needs to." "I really don't care anymore," Drew answered with a nod. "Won't you miss him?" the thug pressed. "No. I've moved on," Drew replied with words that cut at Ben. "Really?" the thug inquired. "That's my girlfriend. I had to wait until he was gone before I could bring her on. If he was cheating with other girls, I thought, why couldn't I?" Drew replied while her eyes darted to Ben. The thug smiled as he said, "I always suspected that all women are lesbians at heart." "That's because men always let us down," Drew countered. "Well, remember, we're watching you." "I know," Drew replied, steeling herself in the face of the menacing figure. "Good," the man said before he walked away from them. Drew and Ben's hearts raced while they watched him cross the street and disappear into a crowd of people. Drew looked over at Ben and said, "I'll take you home." "Thanks," Ben said while breathing heavy. "My home," Drew added. "Why?" Ben asked. "I can't be alone tonight." I understand. And I'm going to need my girlfriend to do something to take my mind off what just happened." "I'll do whatever you need me to," Ben replied with his eyes downcast. "Yes, you will," Drew noted with steely-eyed resolve.